Welcome, everybody. This is a special council meeting for the County of Annapolis for the purpose of commencing our review of the budget for the upcoming year. I'll start with the roll call. District 1.
Bruce Prout.
District 2.
Brian Fuzzy Connell.
District 3 is Alan Parrish, myself. District 4. You're muted, Clyde.
Sorry about that, Clyde Bardo.
District 5.
Lynn Longmire.
District 6.
Alec Morrison.
District 7.
David Hudson.
District 8.
Michael Gunn.
District 9.
Wendy Sheridan.
District 10.
Redden.
And District 11.
Diane LeBlanc.
Thank you, everyone. So council has received two documents, one 38-page document, which is the background for some of the budget, and a presentation that I printed out. It was 40 pages. And at this point in time, I will pass it over to the CAO, Mr. Dick, who I understand will lead us through the presentation. Yes, Madam Clerk. You're muted, Carolyn.
Sorry, I thought I hit it. Could you approve the order of the day, please?
I don't have it in front of me. Is it just the budget?
It's one item of new business, yeah.
Okay. Would someone like to, I see Councillor LeBlanc moves to approve the order of the day, seconded by Councillor Longmire. Yes, Councillor Bartow.
You stated that you had the 38-page in front of you. That's two stages back. The one we have today had the order of the day on it. So I think you never printed off the latest version. So if you were going through that, you might not be in track with the rest of us.
We'll have to figure that out, I guess.
I'd like to be able to open this up.
The latest one was like 22 pages, including the agenda.
When did that come out?
Yesterday.
I got one yesterday. That's the presentation.
No, it was before that. But it was the, what was it called?
Oh, Jesus.
Was a special committee of the whole agenda, I think.
Yeah.
But that I took that to be the cover page, and then the what's it, 19-page.
There's 22 pages in total.
Yeah, that was, but it was a reprint of something plus the cover. Anyway,
Yeah. It was a redo.
got them all here.
I saw that yesterday. I thought that was with respect to the upcoming committee of the whole meeting, with respect to the procedure. This is a council meeting. No, that was.
This is a special committee of the whole?
Oh, this is a special committee of the whole, is it?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I believe what may have happened is that when the agenda was sent out, attached along with that agenda was the budget again.
Well, should I be going and printing that off before we get going, since I'm going to be chairing the meeting? Are we working off that, or are we working off the presentation that I did have? Mr. Dick?
I personally don't think it's necessary.
Mr. Dick? Can you hear me?
The presentation will be fine.
Okay, the presentation will be fine. Okay. Anything else with respect to the order of the day? I'll call for a vote on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion's carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Dick.
We ready to start? Before we officially start the budget process, just a couple of housekeeping things I'd like to bring to council's attention. As council may be aware, we just recently hired an engineer who, much to my pleasure, I saw him actually drive into the building again today. So that's 2 days in a row that he showed up. So Jim Young, we have too many Youngs now working for the county, but Jim Young is our new engineer, started work with the county effective yesterday. And some of you may have met Angela Anderson. She's joined us about 3 weeks ago, Angela. Angela moved here from Morelia, Ontario, and she's also going to be here for a while because apparently she just bought a house. So I suspect that she's not interested in leaving. So that's the sort of the housekeeping. Before I start, in the tradition of budgets, I'm bringing a new pair of boots. In case there's any mud being slung, I will at least keep the bottom of my pants clean with these rubber boots that thankfully the ward bought for me last April. They're now 12 months old and I've worn them. This will be the second time I put them on my feet. So we'll start the budget presentation, and before I officially
Mr. Dick, if I could interrupt, I see Councillor Hudson has his hand up. You're muted, Councillor Hudson.
Is anyone else having problems hearing Dave?
Yeah, I see-
hear him, but it's quite faint.
You moved away from your mic.
I can hear him, but are we going to go through the process with this? I just see a little screen of the council chambers.
Unfortunately, I think that's all you're going to see. Other than you're going to see the actual presentation.
Okay, we are going to see the actual presentation.
Correct.
Okay.
You don't need to see me or my boots, but you will see the presentation.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I apologize, Councillor Hudson. I'm going to probably be moving from where I'm sitting to the podium. So you may not hear me for the next 20 minutes. It's a long walk. So before I officially start the presentation, I just want to advise council of two things. As you're looking through the numbers that we sent to you Friday, and again, maybe Saturday, and again, maybe Sunday, and again, maybe yesterday. Before I start, I want to thank staff for putting this together and recognizing that this isn't exactly the document I was hoping to present to council, but given the fact that I went home for Easter, I didn't have enough time to prepare what I really wanted to prepare. So I want to thank all of the staff for assisting with this process. I want to advise council not to put a whole lot of stock in the numbers that say actual, because those were put into the budget document about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and I have not updated those to reflect current actual results. And again, as I mentioned on a number of occasions, the previous budget, there are some areas in that previous budget that I'll speak to today that I don't have a lot of confidence in. So again, what we're trying to do is give you comparisons to budget, so we at least have a move forward position going forward in 22-23, and I suspect that it'll be much better next year when we start actually doing variance analysis. So with that being said, I don't know who's operating this, David. Is it you or me? Me? Okay. So here's the big page. It's not up on the big screen. Is this everybody seeing this one, or are they just seeing that one?
They're seeing this one.
Okay, but they need to see this one.
They're
Okay.
gonna see it back.
Okay, it's just gonna be a minute delay.
I'm gonna track it.
Okay, so I have a bet with staff that this budget meeting will be over in 5 minutes. I'm the only one that's putting money on this 5-minute bet. Nobody else is. So this is the summary of where the budget is as of today. I suspect that there may be changes between now and Thursday when we have our second budget session, but I wanted to give you a picture of where we were last year and where we are this year. So if you look at the top line, that's the operating expenditures. So staff has gone through in detail what their expenditure requests are for the current year. We've sat down on a number of occasions, gone through them, made the appropriate changes, and come up with a budget request this year of $21,064,000. That's compared to $21,316,000 in the previous budget. The next step is we look at all the non-tax revenues, and the non-tax revenues are everything except for taxation, not area charges, not the Bridgetown community rate. It's the taxes. So if you look at the 7.8313 million, that's all the non-tax revenue, and that compares with the $8.6 million last year in our budget. So the net requirement this year has gone from $12,671,000 to $13,250,000. That's a $580,000 increase year over year, which is 4.6%. And when you look at it, as we all know, inflation is moving somewhere between 5.4 and 7%, depending on what numbers you look at. And remembering that CPI is not really a true reflection of the work that we do in a municipality. There is something called a municipal price index that typically values some of those commodities that we use, particularly the oil-based products, at a higher level than the 5.4 that the economy is moving at. So we've actually brought in a budget that's only looking at a 4.6% overall increase, which for all intent and purposes is pretty good, but there's some explanations as to why it's not at 5.4. That being said, we also know that the assessment has gone up by 5.4%. So if we did nothing else, we kept the same tax rate that we had last year at the assessment that we had last year, we would generate $1.105 million in additional revenue, which means we are going to have a tax rate. If council were to approve this in 2 minutes now, because I've spoken for 3, we could approve the tax rate. And I'm sorry, but this doesn't have I adjusted the screen yesterday and this doesn't seem to have it. The tax rate has gone from 0.01, Shelley, where are you?
0.01
to 5 to 0.009853. So the tax rate is in fact gone down. If council were to say, we will approve the requirement of $13,250,000, the tax rate has gone down from 1.025 to 0.9853. I apologize, that is on my screen, but it's not on the big screen. So what that means is the average household in Annapolis County has been valued at $140,000. Last year, that house paid $1,435 in taxes. This year, that same house is valued at $147,560, and the taxes are $1,454 for a $19 increase.
Increase. Yeah.
Mr. Dick,
Yes.
thank you for that. If I could just interrupt on a procedural matter at this point. Councilors, I only see half of you on my screen on the right-hand side. And I anticipated this might be the case. So I spoke to Mr. Dick yesterday about this. And Mr. Dick would like councilors to raise their issues as he goes through the presentation rather than waiting to the end. The difficulty is that I can't see you all. There's a little arrow that I can hit to see the other half of you. So if there's something that you want to say, I don't see, some of these Zoom things have a little hand at the bottom where you can put your hand up, and I don't see that on my screen. So it looks like, unless somebody else has a better technical ability than I do, that if you want to say something and raise a question, and you happen to be on the side I don't see, you'll have to speak up and somehow interrupt. I can't think of any other way to do it. Mr. Hopkins, is there some way I can see all of the councilors while we're going through this?
If you're going to see all the counselors, you're not going to see the presentation. So that's a challenge. I think what you're saying is, with the interruption, is probably the best way forward.
Okay. All right, then we'll proceed on that basis.
If I could offer a solution, if a council member wants to put a motion forward accepting the budget as it's being just presented, then we won't have this as an issue. I've got a bet, 5 minutes.
Oh, you're good. Oh,
I'm just saying.
Mr. Dick, I have a question. When you say the assessment increase is 5.4%, does that include the calculation with respect to the cap?
That is with the cap. That's the total assessment increase year over year, which also includes new growth. And I think if you recall the meeting we had maybe a couple of 3 weeks ago, the new dollars associated with new growth, I think it was $194,000, I think is what we had calculated. So the rest of that 1.105 is just assessment related growth.
Yeah, but it does include, there's an increase in assessment, and then the increase would be reduced when you apply the cap, and I just wanted to confirm
that. That's the increase that we're experiencing. The actual growth was far in excess of 5.4%.
Yeah.
I think the average house Average house increase was 27.6%.
Oh,
I don't see any motions coming forward, so I guess I have to do the rest of the presentation. Darn it.
okay.
Okay, so,
I don't
sorry?
see any other questions. I don't see any other questions. Please go ahead. Thank you.
okay. So this is just another way of looking at it because some of us do like to look at graphs. So this is just a year over year reflection of revenues in 21-22 versus 22-23. So you can see on the left graph, excuse me, the total taxation revenue required is 13,250,000, which is the same number we just spoke to, relative to 12,636,000 the year before. And if you follow your way down through the rest of the slide, you'll see the other sources of revenue, and we will discuss those sources of revenue in a little bit more detail as we move through the presentation. No questions. I'll move to the next slide. So the next slide is just a breakdown, as I talked about earlier, the non-tax related revenues. This is a summary of what those revenues are. And the first one being provincial revenue, and that's primarily equalization grant. And I do want to qualify and or quantify that the 21-22 actual number that we physically received from the province exceeded that $1,008,000 by $405,000, give or take. Similarly, in 22-23, we're expecting to receive about $1.4 million in equalization. But we recognize that in both of those years, it's about $405,000 in each year that the province has increased the equalization grant to provide for retro pay to RCMP. So what we're doing is we're not recording that as revenue because it isn't revenue at this point. It's a deferred revenue because it's going to be used for a specific expenditure. So it's sitting there as a liability, or it will be in our financial statements effective today or tomorrow or whenever council approves the budget. And that's the true reflection of the revenue that we are going to recognize this year from equalization. If the feds decide to make that retro pay adjustment to the RCMP during the current year, we will reflect that both as an additional revenue of $810,000 and an additional expense of $810,000. You move down to the next line, it's called federal, and you see that there's a big swing between the budget from last year to the budget this year, and that's primarily because of pandemic relief funding. I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of almost $700,000. So that, other than that, year over year, the numbers are pretty consistent. Sewer revenue, and this is primarily the same numbers that council approved at the last council meeting last Tuesday when we presented the Bridgetown sewer and the county sewer rates. That's pretty much the revenue that we would expect to generate from the sewer services that we provide to the community. Payments in lieu, and that's really what those are, is the reflection of federal and provincial buildings that do not have to pay property taxes, but out of the goodness of their heart, they pay us something called payments in lieu or grants in lieu. And for all intent and purposes, it reflects the assessed value of their properties times the tax rate. I will say that this is something that's been going on forever and a day, but the feds in the province they like to tell us that they're doing that out of the goodness of their heart. They do not have to pay that to us, so they do not have to pay that specific amount. I've never heard of a situation where they haven't given us exactly what the tax rate would be. The next big one is de-transfer tax, and you can see that in 21-22 we budgeted for about $1.5 million, which is the norm. That's what we've been budgeting for the last, I don't know, probably half dozen years. You will see that the actual amount that we received as of the date of preparation of this is 2.6 million. It's actually a little bit higher than that, but I haven't, as I mentioned earlier, we haven't reflected the actual numbers up to the end of March 31st. So we generated a significant amount of additional revenue associated with the transfer tax. And as no surprise to anybody in the province, there's a bunch of people from other provinces that have moved here to take advantage of the fact that the recent budget announcement by the province hasn't kicked in yet, the 5% and the 2 cents per $1,000. So we've generated probably, I'm going to guess, $1.2 to $1.3 million additional revenues in the current year directly attributable to de-transfer tax. So we deliberated what the appropriate amount for budget purposes would be, recognizing that there's still a lot of this movement that was happening into the county and into the province. That will be stymied somewhat by what the province has just announced. So we're still being pretty aggressive by saying that we are expecting to generate $1.8 million. Again, that's our best guess. That could be back to the 1.5 if a lot of these out of provincers decide not to come because the additional tax burden associated not only with property taxes, but the deed transfer tax, that number could be something that we will have to watch closely and maybe mitigate during the course of the year. Bridgetown community rate, based on the meeting that we had in February, we've adjusted this to reflect what council's desires were based on the presentation that staff made and the motions that council approved. And you will see that $295,000 as revenue is also listed as expenses for Bridgetown community rate. So at least now we've identified the expenses, determined what those are, and we're charging the community of Bridgetown the exact same amount. And again, I'll reiterate that this has not been done in the past. We just had numbers there. We just increased them by 2% every year and never really tried to reflect what the actual numbers were relative to what we were collecting. Area rates are, again, we've determined what the costs are for street lighting and fire hydrants and the other places that we have area rates. We figured out what the costs are. We've applied those rates to those specific benefiting landowners, and recovered the cost associated with that. So it's an in and out for both the Bridgetown community rate and general area rates in total. So those are in and outs, but we do have to reflect them on both sides of our ledger. Fees, fines, permits, down a little bit this year. And the reason that it's down, somebody help me out here. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll come back to that one. I think I remember what that is. It'll come back to me. And then the big one in terms of revenue is Basin View. We are reflecting a reduction in revenue from Basin View, of course, because Basin View isn't open any longer. So you'll notice that there's a big change in revenues of 163 to 0. And again, when we talk about the expenses, you'll see that there's a big change in the expenses that goes from $800,000 to 0. So if there's any specific questions about this, I will probably provide some additional detail as we're going through the respective departments. But that's generally where our non-tax revenue is generated. And we use that to determine what our overall tax rate's going to be. So if there's no questions, I will. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Redden.
Have we done any sort of preliminary work as to like how much of our tax base is owned by out of province landowners?
Have we done? No.
Okay.
So what I've tried to do is every time I have a slide or a chart, I just try to provide some narrative. So I've already spoken to the slide, so I don't really need to speak to it again. And again, I see the second bullet says Sports Hub. That's supposed to be pandemic relief. So obviously this isn't the most recent presentation that we finalized yesterday afternoon that I think council has access to.
Mr. Dick, if I could just pick up on the question that Councillor Redden had with respect to the deed transfer tax. My understanding is that last Friday night, the province did pass Bill 149, but are you aware, or is someone there around the table with you as to when it's going to come into effect? I assume there needs to be some regulations and that kind of thing. Do we anticipate that it'll come in soon, or do you know anything about that?
Everything I've read to date, and somebody in this room can correct me, is April 1st. So it's retroactive.
It's retroactive to April the 1st, but they don't have the method set up yet to collect the taxes.
Agreed. So they will go back and back charge. If it's applicable, they will go back and back charge it, I presume, effective April 1st.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm there. Talked to that one. Spoken to that one. Okay, I just wanted to point out this slide, and you can see the differences between expenditures or the different revenue sources. in 21-22, and again, 21-22 is the left-hand side and the right-hand side is the 22-23. And these are the same numbers that we've spoken to. But one of the things I wanted to point out with this in terms of the budget that I'm working from the previous year, the revenues and the expenditures are off by $34,787. So I want council to understand that when we were going through this exercise, trying to tie in what was done in 21 and 22 with what we should be comparing it to this year, there was a number of hurdles that we had to overcome. And so when I was going through one of the documents that I was using for revenues and expenses, I recognized that revenues and expenses did not equal for budget purposes in our system by 34,878. Not sure how that happens. And again, 34,000 on 21,000 or 21 million is not a big number. But I just want council to recognize that there was some challenges that we faced when we were trying to put this together. I will also speak to the fact that you've all heard of gremlins. Well, we had a number of gremlin issues in terms of some of the spreadsheets that we were using, and we tried to do something different this year where we could all access the same spreadsheet theory at the same time. Well, I know at one point when it was transferred to me to use, something happened with the way the formulas were calculating, and they weren't calculating at all. So I had to go through there and I had to get the wizards in the IT department to come and figure out what the problem was. And something had happened and one of the formula boxes had been ticked that it shouldn't have been. And I was actually manually recalculating everything. That is now corrected, but we were having problems as late as Sunday afternoon. And that's why you received 3 different documents of what our budget was, because we were sending things to you that weren't totally up to date. I had them up to date, but Heather, for example, didn't have them up to date or vice versa. So there were some challenges that we had going through this, but even though if you look at the graph, it looks like it's a big swing between 2 years. I've just used 5 million as the base as opposed to 0. So the significant difference is relatively minor. We're only looking at roughly $260,000 difference. Generally, we'll go through, these are sort of the line items at a higher level from a budget perspective. So the 21-22 are the budget numbers that were approved last year for the most part. And the 22-23 tie into the other slides that we presented today. So I just want to walk through some of these specific areas to give council a sense of why the numbers are changing from year to year. So you'll recall at the budget meeting a 3 weeks ago when Heather and I presented that high level budget, we talked about the fact that in 2019, after budget was approved, there was a number of people that were hired and they've never been put in the budget. So when you look at the wage to benefit number year over year, you're going up about $600,000. Frightening when at the end of the day, all we're talking about for all intent and purposes is 1.8 full-time employee. And we're going to be asking council to give us permission to hire 3 other employees that represent some succession issues that we see that will happen over the next 12 months. So if you take those out, there's still about a $350,000 year over year difference. And that's because in 2019, we hired 3 people, didn't put them in the budget in 2020 or 2021 or last year's budget. So when we take those 3 employees, multiplied by statutory increases and multiplied by the benefits, that generates about $300,000 of difference. So don't be alarmed at the $600,000 difference. The reality is it's only about $300,000. Okay. The next line item is professional development, and our budget 2 years ago, or last year, excuse me, was $186,000. We've bumped that up to $266,000 this year. And one of the things that I believe in strongly is professional development for all employees. And I suspect I could probably walk around this room and the whole county staff complement and ask how many people have actually taken professional development in the last 2 years. And the answer is probably very few. So I know that's a scary number, 265,000, but we need to do professional development. There's some numbers included in there that represent some management level training that we really need to do. There's some numbers in there that represent training for workplace environment, and that's something clearly that we need to do. And there's some dollars in there for council, and we can speak about that in a few minutes. I believe that continual learning is extremely important for a bunch of reasons. It's good for staff, just for no other reason than it's good for staff. It's good for the county because we learn things when we go to these training sessions. And it's also good that we can network with our colleagues across the province, or in some cases, maybe across the country. And then when an issue surfaces here, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can call up these colleagues that we've met with at some of these conferences and seminars, and we can ask them if they've dealt with it. And so I'm a strong believer in not reinventing the wheel. If somebody else has done it, why don't we steal, beg, borrow, and we can do that. So it's a big number. I don't think it's inappropriate. I think it's probably the right number, but it is a significant increase year over year. Professionals, sorry?
Go ahead.
Sorry, can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Yes, through you, Warden, to David Dick. I'm just wondering if we could get an up-to-date organizational chart.
You can, and I apologize because I think that was ready for today, and I think I probably just omitted that. So I will get that sent out to you. I'll ask Kate to send that out to you as we're going through this meeting.
Thank you so much.
Okay, welcome. The next one's materials and supplies, and that's just about everything that we buy over the course of the year. And if you look at it year over year, the numbers are not significantly different. So I don't want to get into the significant details of what those are, but those really come down to the responsibility of the directors and the managers and the acting managers and the assistant managers in terms of running their department. You know, those are chemicals for the waste system, and those are a number of things. But suffice it to say, we've spent some time going through those numbers, and for all intent purposes, the increases are less than inflation, which is fairly positive. The next line item at a high level is professional services, and this really reflects costs for legal, audit, and consulting. And again, happy to say that those numbers are going to be, or the projections are that they will be less than they were in previous years. And the primary reason is that we expect that our legal fees will be less than they were in previous years. And if you'll recall from that meeting a couple of weeks ago, I think in each of the last 2 years, we've spent somewhere between $550,000 and $600,000 annually on legal fees. I haven't got a final figure for this current year that just ended in March 22, but I suspect it's going to be well in excess of 400,000. I do not anticipate our legal fees, other than the current suits against us, of which we're down to at least, I think, down to the last one or two, that we will be minimizing the extent of services that we're paying for in terms of the legal issues that we've dealt with. So that's a good thing. And at the end of the day, we're probably still spending too much money, but I suspect once these things get resolved, and as the warden has said on a couple of occasions, one of them might still go out 2 or 3 years, but these numbers are still excessive given the size of the municipality. The legal fees should, in my opinion, should not even get close to $100,000, and we'd be paying far in excess of that. Looking down at the next one, it's contracts and municipal service agreements. So this has gone up, and part of the reason is $68,000 for IMSA that we signed at the end of last year. We're also talking in here about some potential funding for the hospice, which council recalled the meeting we had, I think it was the last committee of the whole, that they were asking for $50,000 on an annual basis for a period of time. And there's also the TCTS, if I've got the acronyms right, and they made a presentation to council a number of months ago asking for 25,000. So those 3 areas alone are part of the reason that there's a significant increase. The other 2 big ones are the strategic plan. So we have budgeted for the strategic plan, and I suspect that we will, if we haven't finalized our RFP, it will be done fairly shortly. And we're also looking at, and we'll speak to this at probably the next council meeting, about having a consultant come in to do a compensation review, to do performance reviews and job descriptions, because again, we're severely lacking in that. So those are 2 other fairly significant items that we've got in terms of contracts and consulting engagements going forward.
Mr. Dick, Councillor Proud has a question.
Sure.
Thank you. You mentioned TCTS, and you're correct. They did ask for an additional 25,000 to reduce or decrease the fares for clients. I'm assuming the other, which is they get a grant from us for 35,000. That would show up in the grants which we're not looking at today.
Yeah, no, that's already there. This is just additional. That 25 is just additional to what we paid in the past.
Okay, so they will be getting the 60.
Correct, yes. Yes.
Thank you very much. Just, that was the thought I had over the weekend when I was going through this. Thank you.
The next one is grants. And I just
Just a
want to-
minute, sorry, Mr. Dick, I have a question. With respect to the $50,000 for the hospice, council hasn't, formally come to any conclusion on that. For the record, if this project goes ahead, I'm in favor of contributing that amount of money. But as I say, council hasn't come to that conclusion yet. I would think that if council was of the view to provide the $50,000, it would be done by way of a pledge on the condition that the matter go ahead. And, from the presentation, it's a wonderful idea. I'm all in favor of it, but it seemed like the proponent has a long way to go to get his financing lined up. And it would seem to me that if we agreed to pledge that amount of money, my guess is it wouldn't be called upon in the current fiscal year, the upcoming fiscal year. And I see this issue's dealt with later on in your presentation. And I don't know whether to raise it now or later on, but it seems to me rather than raising that money from our taxpayers now, without knowing whether this project is going to go ahead, that we could put it off to the next fiscal year. And if in fact the project gets off the ground, we could make the pledge that any payment would come once they got their financing in place, and we would finance it in the next fiscal year, or something like that. So
Totally agree. Totally agree. But staff did not want council to lose sight of that request being made a few weeks ago. So at the end of the day, if that's the decision council wants to make, is to defer that 50,000, for example, or any decision, but we'll use that as an example. If they want to defer that till next year, then we will take it out of the budget and we will provide the appropriate correspondence to the hospice people that, yes, we're still in.
So is this the time to raise that for
Well,
council
you
to
can
decide?
raise anything at any point. This is why I want this back and forth, that if council wants to do this, and if council agrees to it, then we will make that adjustment. And so one of the things that we want to do as well is, as adjustments are made, if they're made, we want to show you the impact as soon as we can in terms of that $140,000 house year over year, to show you what the impact might be.
So, Mr. Dick, would it be appropriate for me to invite other councillors to comment on whether we should put the 50,000 off until the next fiscal year and deal with the matter in council? And if we are all together about pledging the 50,000, we do it conditional on the financing when it's raised, type of thing? Is this the time for that discussion?
I think now is as good as any other time.
Okay, it's Alec here.
Yeah. Go ahead,
Thank you.
Councillor Morrison.
Thank you. As the councillor for the district, of course, because of the advantages of having a hospice, I am all in favor. I am also strongly in favor of the wording that the warden used or the CAO used, or maybe both of them, that we pledge a certain amount and then we ensure that the project is going ahead before we actually disperse that amount of money. Thank you.
So, Councillor Morrison, the question before us is whether we include the 50 in this budget and raise the money from our taxpayers this year, or whether we assume that if we pledge it in the next council meeting, that we wouldn't be required to pay it until the next fiscal year. That the question is whether we put it in this budget now.
I would not object to the latter course. That is, we pledge it, but it goes in next year's budget.
Okay. Any other comments from councillors?
Wendy here.
Yeah.
I totally agree that possibly, I'm 100% in agreement with this project. And I also would like to see it possibly be pledged in this way, not in this year's budget, but in next year's. Thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Longmire?
And I would just like to agree as well with the other two councillors on the points that they have just spoken. Thanks.
Mr.
Anyone
Warden?
else? Any
Right
other
here.
comments? Go
Right
ahead.
here, sir.
Is that Mr. Deputy Warden?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm all for this project. And they've asked for basically $200,000 over 4 years. If this project goes ahead, that means the next 4 years, we'd be pledging $50,000 a year. Wouldn't it be prudent to sort of get this out of the way now and start putting money aside for this project? Because we don't know at the end of this year, before our next fiscal year, let's hope this gets going and other counties divvy in, and this may go sooner than later. Let's hope for the best, but I think to prepare for it is not a bad thing. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Mr.
Anyone
Warden?
else? Councillor LeBlanc?
Yes, thank you. I have to agree. I agree with this hospice. However, maybe we should be putting the money aside. That's exactly what I was going to bring up. And maybe we can put it into a specific fund to hold on, or even maybe even half of it, instead of just moving it on to a next year and the next year and the next year, where everything comes to fruition. Maybe it's time to put it aside. I don't know if it's 25 or 50, and I understand why we'd want to go and wait as well, but I think we should consider both sides to this issue. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Councillor Redden?
Mr. Ward, if I can just chime in just for 1 second.
Sure.
I am a strong believer in the comments that the previous councillors made, is that we should be putting stuff aside going forward. And there's a couple of other discussions I'll have about setting reserves for future expenditures. So given that council wants to do this, maybe I might just suggest, maybe until we're finished, now that we know that this is an item for discussion, if we get to the end of the day and we say that the budget is what council wants, then you can make a decision on this 50,000 based on where we end up, if there's any future changes made within today and Thursday.
That works for me. Does it work for council? Anybody disagree with putting this off until we get to the bottom line? I don't see it. Of course, I don't see everybody, but I'm flipping around and I don't see anybody objecting. So that's fine. We'll just put this aside for now. Good discussion, and then we can go ahead with your presentation, Mr. Dick.
Councillor Hudson, I'm sorry, I think I see your hand up, or is it? Maybe no, maybe it was just scratching his pencil.
No, okay.
Councillor Bardo has his hand up.
Councillor Bartow, do you have your hand up?
Just one question.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. Through you, Warden, to the CAO. I agree we can put this off to the end, but I just wanted to, before, while it's still fresh in mind, if we did keep it in the budget, and if it isn't used, I guess it would go in reserve. It couldn't be used for anything else, so it would have to be set aside. Am I correct?
Correct. You would, council, make the determination. If you would decide to leave it in the budget, we will allocate that to a reserve for the hospice.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see anybody else before we move along. I'm flipping back and forth as best I can here. Councillor Redden?
I just had a question, and I just don't recall the answer. I was curious why we were paying into the IMSA already when the 2 years on the project hasn't started ticking over yet, because that doesn't start until the 2 years doesn't start until we hire people. So I was kind of wondering why we're already putting funds there already. That's
so the anticipation. I don't know what the actual start date will be, but we will have started this year. So we want to make sure that we put the liability aside for the current year, because if you recall that it was supposed to start in the previous year, and there was an amount in that year, a full amount this year, and then a partial year, year 3. I think we're just going to be moving that out 1 year. So this is what the amount is that they've allocated for the current year. And if you recall, I think the total is, help me out, Mr. Warden, I think it's 134, give or take.
Yes, I think that over 2 years. That's right. And if I could just add to that, my understanding is that the actual requirement of any payment would start when the project actually begins, and the project won't begin until we've hired either a CAO or a consultant, which the Valley municipalities have not yet done. So there's been no payment yet, as far as I understand it, because the pilot project hasn't commenced yet.
So to Councillor Redden's point, if we don't think that this is going to start, let's just say for 6 months, we could have effectively reduced that in half if that's the direction council wanted to go.
I'm hopeful it'll start in a month or two, but future.
The future. I've been waiting.
Okay, where are we? Grants, I want to speak generally to grants. And the big grant that council has is, and staff can help me out, I think it's 1.66% or 1.69% of assessment. Is that it? So last year, council had allocated, and my numbers might be a little bit wrong, but last year during the budget process, council had allocated 218,000. To date, we've spent about 165 of it. So we've got about a $50,000 threshold from last year. What I would like to suggest is let's reduce this year's contribution to not the 1.69%, but to 200,000 even, and carry that $50,000 forward. So the total amount for those grants, instead of being, and coincidentally, the numbers work out to be about the same. So the option here is either that 50,000 goes to general surplus, or it goes to a carry forward for grants, and we can reduce this year's grant requirement by roughly 50,000. Does that make sense?
I don't know if I understood that. I see the 380, 150. And I did see in the background material, you wanted 200,000 for grants.
Right.
How do you go from the 200,000 to the 380? Can you
Oh,
tell me?
I'm only talking about that one grant, the community grants, and we also have the heritage grants and some other ones, but it's just the one that's based on that calculation. So rather than allocating 1.69 times the higher assessment number, which means it would be 5.4% higher than last year, and we've still got to carry forward, what we're suggesting is let's just budget for the 200,000, carry forward the 50. We'll have 250 to give out for those community grants, and there's a number of them, and effectively save the tax base by that 50,000 is essentially what we're saying.
Any questions on that?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So therefore, I can see your point. I understand it. In the last couple of years, have we gone over the $200,000 limit?
I don't believe, Don, help me out here, but I don't think we've ever gone over the amount that council's allocated. We have?
We have, but it was pre-COVID, and I think COVID certainly factors into this, because undertaking projects at community halls, for example, was slowed down by the COVID.
And that's my concern. COVID did a number, so therefore, I'm not sure that the 200,000 would cover if everybody starts going on the projects that they couldn't go forward with before.
Well, it's actually 250,000. We're carrying forward the unspent allocation from the current year.
Oh, okay.
We'll carry that forward. So it's actually 250,000.
Okay, yeah. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. The next one is the Bridgetown community rate, and this is one of those areas that I've been in finance for a long time. I don't even understand this one. I don't know why we've got it listed as an expense last year, in addition to all the other expenses we have. So suffice it to say, it's zero for the current year, because I really cannot explain what that means. I tried to do some research on it, and it doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not saying it was incorrect, but I just don't quite understand it. The next one is strategic initiatives, and that is primarily for, and I think I misspoke earlier when I said in contracts that included the strategic plan. This $110,000 includes a component for strategic plan, a component for medical practitioner recruitment, and for a consultant to come in and help us determine what, if anything, we want to do with the south side of Upper Clements Park.
Any questions on that? I don't see any. I'm flipping back and forth here. Did I see a hand there?
Yes.
That would be me next.
Go ahead, Councillor Connell, I see your hand.
So you were waiting for me, are you?
Yeah, go ahead, Fessy.
Yeah, I've kind of got my page frigged up there, but I'm running on 2 computers, so I got the budget on my big laptop, so it's up full, but I've lost the contact with the actual council chambers. But my question was on the grants. My questions on the grants is how are we going to build up our had a brain wave there, but
We can come back to you if you want, Councillor Connell.
yeah, come back to me. The phone rang, threw me off.
Next, I have Councillor Barteau and then LeBlanc.
Yes, I noticed on the strategic initiatives, last year's budget had 45 in there, and then this year's got 110. Has the budget for previous years where we haven't really done anything on that been carried forward and is part of that 110, or where did it go?
So of that 45, I think to date, we've spent about 2,500 bucks of it. And last year, if you recall, a significant component of that strategic initiative was moving expenses for me. So of course that, unless you want to move me back to Ontario, that won't exist this year. So the numbers that we've got in the 110 are pretty much brand new numbers. Medical recruitment, when the committee met a number of months ago, we sort of agreed that that was probably an appropriate place if we needed some funding for the current year. And I think we used some funds from that to help assist the doctor that moved to Middleton. But other than that, really the spending out of that account has been virtually zero. So the 110 is really strategic planning, which is about 45 is what we're anticipating that to cost. We're expecting the medical practitioner cost to be about 45. And Deborah, I think it's 20 grand that we're looking for the consultant to help us with the south side of Upper Clements Park.
So the total on that would be about 150 if you carry forward last year's.
And we're not asking to carry forward it.
Okay.
Councillor LeBlanc.
Thank you. I'd like to say that Mr. Dick has explained exactly what I was going to say about the 45 being for the physician recruitment. But at one time, I think we had thought that from that, we had 45, we used 10 of it, and we were left at 35. And we're just going back up to 45. We're not going to move over the 35 to it, correct?
That's really a council decision, whether you wanted to bump that from 45 to whatever that is, 80,000. That's really a council decision. That's not something that staff was recommending at this point.
No, but good explanation. Thank you.
Councillor Connell.
Yes, I guess my question is that, looking at the first slide, and which I could have voted on, thanks to David, knowing that the average household, the tax rate could go down, but they still pay the same amount or $12 more. But my question is that how are we going to build our reserves that have been dwindled to very little? I mean, if the tax rate is going to drop a little bit to do with inflation and the cost of housing and the amount of housing income we have, if we transfer the 50,000 we got left over from grants to this year, why wouldn't we just put that into reserves to start building our reserves and add the whole thing to this year's budget?
So that is a perfect question. The problem with it is, and I'm a strong believer in reserves, and you've heard me talk about reserves on a number of occasions. The problem with it is at this point is we don't know where the 21 financial statement year end is going to get us. We're expecting, Nancy, a surplus of give or take 200,000, correct? The current year that just ended, March 22, we're expecting a surplus in this year, primarily due to the deed transfer revenues being 1.3 million higher than budgeted. Don't know what the number is because we haven't finalized them. So, you know, in a normal course of events, you just say put those directly to reserves and then we'd probably be okay. But we do have some significant issues, and the issues being how do we fund Gordonston? Because we've invested to date, outside of the acquisition of the land, we've invested about $1.5 million. That's got to be financed somewhere. And the logical spot is it either comes out of an operating reserve or potentially out of a capital reserve. So Councillor Connell, that is a terrific question. And I would like you to keep that in the back of your head, because I've talked to the warden yesterday, and that's a discussion I want to have at a future meeting where we can actually have a discussion about reserves in general. So we have a sense of where we are. I totally agree that a reserve position probably isn't adequate. And I appreciate the fact that you want to continue to build them. I think that's the right course of action. Unfortunately, we're just not right there yet in terms of telling you exactly what the reserve positions are, but very much appreciated the question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Councillor Longmire?
Thank you. I'm wondering about Raven Haven and if we're going to be hiring any persons to work the day park. And if so, had we looked into Canada Student Summer Job Grants?
Yes and yes.
Great, thank you.
But I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be flippant, but we will speak to that specifically. I think the second last slide, we talk about Raven Haven. So yes, we're planning on, I think, is Brian coming to council with a report in November or May, excuse me? We'll be coming with a full report on Raven Haven, but the plan is to keep it open as a day park. And there is some funding available for, I guess what we call interns or summer students throughout the corporation.
Thanks, David.
You're welcome.
Anyone else there? If not, I just have two little comments. First of all, picking up on Councillor Connell's question about the reserves, as Mr. Dick said, he and I did have a discussion about that yesterday. If anything, just to educate me, my question arose from, assuming that we do have a profit from the sale of our internet system of anywhere from $2 to $3 million, what we're going to do with it. And my perhaps incorrect thought was that it had to be in some kind of a capital reserve, whereas I do think we need to build up our operating reserve. I agree with building up our reserves. So that was the discussion we had, and I take it from what Mr. Dick just said a minute ago is that that's something that is going to be dealt with perhaps later on in the council meetings. But I do think that our reserves actually were quite high about 3 or 4 years ago, and they got eaten away. And I agree that we need to build them up, particularly the operating reserve. The other comment that I had was with respect to the medical aspect of the current line. We're looking at strategic initiatives of $45,000 for medical. I'm agreeable to doing that. I just last year there was one new doctor, and we paid $10,000 to the hospital foundation that related to the hospital he was working out of. And I just wonder, are we looking at hopefully recruiting 3 or 4 doctors in the upcoming year? Is that why it's 45,000, or is there something else in there? Mr. Dick, can you respond to that?
Actually, Mr. Warden, if I could ask either Councillor Prout, Morrison, or LeBlanc to speak to that. And I think Longmire as well, I think they're on the committee. They might be able to provide more information.
Sure.
If I may, Mr. Warden.
Sure.
Looking at my file here for the Physician Recruitment and Retention Committee, it's my understanding a new nurse practitioner has moved into the Middleton, or joined the Middleton Collaborative Practice as of, I think my notes say March 26th of this year. I haven't heard anything from the foundation in Middleton yet. There seems to be news on a number of fronts about people coming in to do their 6-week rotation and so on. And as you're probably aware, our committee met with Dr. Simon Bonington from the Annapolis area, Annapolis Royal area as well. So I think it's important that we do have funds there should the need arise, if and when the need arises. Hopefully it will. I don't know if anyone else on the committee, perhaps the vice chair, Councillor Morrison, or either of the other two, Councillor Longmire or Councillor LeBon, may wish to add to that. But I think it's wise to have money there if and when the call comes. That would be my comment. Thank you.
Councillor LeBlanc?
I agree. If we don't have something set up and ready to go, then it would put us in arrears. I think it should be there to for us to be ready for new physicians or nurse practitioners or whoever. And I know that our representative for the Soldiers Memorial is Councillor Sheridan, so she probably knows first off, or quite quickly, what if doctors are interested, or if there's any talk about physicians coming in or nurse practitioners. So it would be interesting to know from her reports where we're at. But I say we should keep it in so we're prepared, and we need the new physician, so that way we'd be prepared.
Councillor Sheridan, did you want to respond to that?
Sure. I haven't had a recent meeting, but when I do, I will certainly bring that question forward in the meeting and get an update. I know they're actively looking. It's difficult in any community to get recruitment in doctors at this time. But yes, I'll certainly have a report. Thank you.
Well, thank you, councillors. I appreciate that. It's I'm optimistic, and I'm quite happy to have the money there, and I hope that we have good reason to spend it. So thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Dick.
If I just may on that topic, not that I'm a believer in pre-taxing unless it's absolutely necessary, but this is an opportunity that presented itself to council a number of months ago. And I look at it and say it was a nice thing that we had that $45,000 set aside for economic development initiatives, and we could actually take money from that account to do what council really wanted to do in terms of doctor recruitment. So the other thing I'll say is that the committee is looking at other avenues besides just having a doctor and pay for whatever that might be. It could be an office, it could be there's been discussions about even potentially finding a university student that wants to commit here and assist with their university education. So there's lots of opportunities there, and it's positive in the sense that every municipality in the province, in the country, is doing something in terms of doctor recruitment, and we have to sort of maintain that same role and make sure that we're not left looking for doctors because all the other municipalities are providing incentives that we're not able to. So jumping down to property valuation, that's our cost for the assessment services. And the number is,
Go ahead, Councillor.
Yes, Dave Hudson. I would like to back up just a little bit. And Councillor Longmire mentioned about the Canada's summer jobs program. And I think the answer was, you said you looked into it, but was there an actual application submitted?
yes.
Has it been approved?
Yes, it has.
Okay, how much is it?
Dawn?
It's a federal program. It's 3 positions. 1 would be located in municipal operations. 2 would be with recreation. It's a subsidization of $6 per hour on the salary. And for recreation, I believe that's around $6,000.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Gordon? Councillor Longmire?
Sorry. Is somebody speaking to me? I can't see anybody.
Councillor Longmire, Warden?
Yeah, if I could just, before you go ahead, Councillor Longmire, something's happened to my screen. I was trying to, when I was flipping back and forth to try and find everybody now. I've seemed to have lost some of the counselors. Mr. Hopkins, do you think you can help me out trying to get me back to being able to see the counselors?
Yeah, I'm working towards that right now.
Warden, until that time, would you like me to let you know if someone has a hand raised?
Sure. Councillor Longmire, why don't you go ahead while Mr. Hopkins is trying to fix me up here?
Sure, thank you, Warden. I just wanted to go back and just speak to the physician recruitment just for a second. We currently are seeing them moving forward with Dr. Jerry's wife, who's also a family physician. And there had been some glitches in her application and it had been stalled on. So we're really excited to know that they're now moving quickly along with her application, which will also help us retain Dr. Jerry. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Excellent.
So it looks like, let me just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Councilor Morrison had to leave at about 10:15.
Oh, I see. So Councillor Morrison has left. So that's why I don't see 11 councillors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. I think, yeah, my screens are at I see all of you at the top instead of the side now. I guess that'll work. Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. So please proceed, Mr. Dick.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. One of the things I neglected to say at the beginning of the meeting is one of the things that we've opened up, and David, don't shake your head yet, is we're opening up for anybody in the community that is watching or has an interest in the budget or has specific questions about the budget. We've opened up an email account that you can send to that email address. What is it, David?
We don't have one yet.
Okay, we will have one before the end of today. And if there's anybody in the community that has any specific questions about the budget or offer some comments about it, that will come here and it'll be reviewed by staff and addressed in whatever fashion it needs to be addressed in. Property valuation services, pretty much the same number year over year as it was budgeted 2 years ago. Tax exemptions, this is based on council approval for low income tax rebates and a number of other initiatives that we have for the tax assessment, and it's also based on historical numbers. So we've come up with that's our best guess of what we anticipate we will be spending this year. And debt servicing year over year is pretty much consistent with what it was in previous years, 375,000 give or take. The next,
Mr. Warden?
Yes, who is that? Oh, yes, Councillor Hudson.
Yes, if you could go back to the debt servicing.
Yeah.
Well, I realize those numbers represent the annual payments that we're going to have to make mainly to the Municipal Finance Corporation. But those payments are made from cash flow. They don't actually hit the revenue statement, do they?
so one of the things that you'll have to remember is that a budget for municipal purposes is not the same as financial statements that you and I may be familiar with. So you're right, the principal component of that will not hit a revenue and expense statement. But because we're raising the tax dollars on an annual basis, we have to raise the full value of the payments, which includes principal. That's where we're showing the full extent of the expense here. Similarly, we do not show, for example, we do not budget for amortization of capital assets, which hits the P&L. So at the end of every year, we do a reconciliation between the budget, which is a cash-based statement for all intent purposes, to our financial statement, showing those items that are balance sheet related versus income statement related. So we do provide that summary on every financial statement when we do our financial statement at the end of the year.
If just a further question, just on what you said, let me get my thoughts here together too. You through the tax rates, okay, you generate money. Aren't those debt servicing already included in the tax rates?
No, tax rates, remember, they're on an annual basis. So each year we have to include those cash payments because they have to be financed through the tax rate.
Okay,
And I know it's a difficult concept from those of us that are typically used to accrual accounting. This is not accrual accounting. This is for purposes of budget, it's cash based for the most part. And then we have to convert that cash base to an accrual basis for the financial statements.
Mr. Dick, if I could just ask a question with respect to the debt servicing, does that include interest that we pay on the Gordonston loan?
That includes, I'm not sure if short-term interest is included in that. I'm not sure how we classify that. I'm not sure if that's included in either there, or it's included in the materials and supplies above, but it's included in one of those two accounts. I'm just not sure how we internally record it, but the interest expense is recorded, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And it is financed through incremental taxes, of course. Okay, I'll jump to the next slide, and that is some additional expenditures. So you'll see that there's an increase in RCMP of about 285,000, and that's no surprise to any of us, but that's the pay increase that's being dictated to date by the federal government on, I think it's 10.8%, give or take.
11.04.
11.04% year over year. Fire protection costs are fairly consistent with what they were the year before. We're basically just adding 2% to fire protection costs. And those costs also include the cost of fire hydrants that are fully recoverable from the benefiting landowners. Fire capital is a little bit higher than the 2%, and that's based, again, because it's based on assessment. It's 6.11.
Councillor Bartow, go ahead.
Yeah, we're rattling through. Just to go back to the RCMP, the negotiations that they had, not including us, there was talk of retroactive to 2017. Are we assuming that the feds are going to pay that, or are we going to have to be looking at amounts related to that we have to budget for?
No, so that was the very first line item we spoke of. The equalization grant for last year and this year have been increased by 405,000, give or take, and that's to accommodate for the retroactive pay for RCMP going back to 2017.
So we are going to be on the hook for.
We've been given the money by the province for it.
Okay.
They've given us $800,000 to accommodate that. So
Okay.
that's not a tax-based expenditure. That's an equalization grant expenditure.
Okay, that's the actual amount.
I think it's $405,633.18. It's 405,000 something. I'm not sure. What the number is, but.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So I just wanted to talk to fire capital again. Again, that's a number that's based on assessment. And again, because assessment's gone up so much higher this year in relative terms than previous years, that number is higher than the norm one would expect on an assessment-based increase. So if council looks at that number year over year, what is it, roughly 50 some odd $1,000? And that's because it's based on the assessment related increase. If council wanted to do something different than the 6.11, then council would have to make a decision on that. I'm not suggesting that they do, but that's for fire capital. And again, it's being raised from the taxpayer. Local road maintenance, and you'll see that there's a slight increase, and that's primarily due to us trying to put our house in order to accommodate the past winter that we've experienced significantly higher level of snowfall than normal, and the cost associated with that has increased. So when Councillor Connell was talking earlier about establishing reserves, this is one that we spoke about a few weeks ago. Is there a thought to want to say, let's look at an average year snowfall and accommodate that through reserves so we don't have an impact when we have a big snowfall to that year's tax base? Maybe we can spread it out over a period of years. Similarly, another example would be elections. And with most places that I've worked for before, for example, will say every 4 years an election will cost $100,000. We should be providing for that in 4 years, $25,000 a year. So the year that the election happens, it's not a tax hit to the taxpayer that particular year. It's a 4-year hit. So when in a couple of weeks, subject to what council does today with the budget, that is a discussion that Angela will be having with council about establishing reserves for those future events that we mitigate annual impacts and spread it over a period of time. So that's one of the reasons why local road maintenance is higher. We're trying to accommodate, just anticipating that the snowfalls are going to be higher than they have been in previous years.
Councillor Barto, you have a question?
Yeah, your category is local road maintenance, but we're talking about snowfall. Is things like repair of surfaces for, because we're having an abnormal amount of, no matter where you drive, potholes.
Right.
Is that included? Is the figure elevated enough to cover that, or is that in a different category?
No, that's in the same category. Yes, so we're accommodating that as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Street lights year over year are roughly the same dollar value that they were. Village sidewalk, that's an annual grant we give to Lawrencetown every year of 10,000. King's Transit, if Councilor LeBlanc would like to speak to this, but that is based on the most recent budget that we received. That is the commitment that they're expecting from the county of Annapolis of 564,000, slightly less than what it was in the previous budget year. So Councilor LeBlanc, I don't know if there's any comments that you want to make about King's Transit particularly, or not that I want to put you on the spot.
No, I really have no comments at this time. I know that the numbers are high. However, the revenues have been staying low because of the last couple of years. So, yeah. And we're going to be looking at other expenses as far as that goes. If they would like us to have a certain place and to put our buses in so that they're protected from the elements and secured at the same time. So, yeah, we'll see.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Dick, my recollection from the last report that we got from King's Transit was that we had a deficit of maybe $30,000. Has that been accounted for in your numbers here?
That's accounted for in the 564, yes.
Okay.
At least based on the numbers that they provided us, yes.
Okay.
Here's another one of those anomalies that I have difficulty trying to explain: shared services. Shared services, if you look at the budget number, it's $76,000, which in accounting terms, that's a debit, which means it's an expenditure, which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me when you look at the budget numbers for 22-23, where it's a credit. And really what shared services are is services that are shared among a bunch of service groups. What the 128 means is that that's what we're recovering. All the expenses that we're charging to the quote unquote taxpayer, we're recovering that for other services that we're providing, primarily water. So the taxpayer can't subsidize the water system, for example. So that $128,000 will show up as an expense on the water budget when we get to it. Why it's 76,000 going the other way, I really can't explain that. I don't have the details of those numbers. Transfer to reserves, year over year, those are allocations that council has decreed. You'll see that there's about a $50,000 increase year over year. And that's because we missed a reserve allocation last year for recreation and culture of about 50 some odd thousand bucks. We missed it last year. So we have allocated that in this year's budget. We didn't raise the funds for it. We will, based on council's bylaw, I think it's a bylaw, I stand to be corrected on that. When we get to the end of the year, we will make that allocation to recreation and culture. We just didn't budget for it. Curbside collection, you can see there's a difference in how we record it this year, because when we had the 1.565, that was when we were delivering the service. If you look at it this year, it's a little bit higher than that, but that's because we've got an increase in rates from Valley Waste of about 4.9 or 5%, I think is what the increase is. So year over year, the actual numbers represent what the costs are, and that's pretty much what we'd expected it to be. We were hoping to have the same rate that we had last year, but unfortunately, inflation has hit them as well. And the last section of the expenditures are just some other costs that we incur on behalf of the taxpayer. The top one is the Board of Education. Year over year, it looks to be fairly consistent with what it was last year. The Housing Authority, you'll see a fairly significant increase. History has suggested that the budget numbers they give us are always understated of what the actual numbers are. So what we've done is we've gone over the last 3 years, determined what the actual numbers are, predicted what it would be for this year. So that's why it's at the level that it is. And we haven't got, as far as I know, we have not got an actual request from them yet. So we have to anticipate in advance what their request might be going forward. Volunteers and grants, there's an increase. It's not just all for volunteers, but that's because we're really re-implementing the volunteer program and the recognition program this year. That's why it's a little higher than it was last year. The after-school program, not that we're discontinuing that, but we've included that in the wage number primarily, as opposed to a separate line item. And there was a couple of questions asked earlier about Raven Haven. That's the year-over-year expected cost associated with Raven Haven, 65,000 relative to 47. I'm not sure why last year's budget was at 47. I know we didn't open it until certainly after I was here, before the decision was made. So it certainly wasn't open the normal time frame, but that's based on what our expected costs are going to be for operating that facility. Sports Hub, based on history now that we've had another full year of having the Sports Hub, that is what our anticipated cost will be, $44,000 and change. Library, the commitment that they've asked for, it looks to be very similar to what it was last year, no change. And the big positive numbers are the net internet cost last year that we had built in our budget of $532,000 that we will not have this year. Thankfully, to the decision council made to divest ourselves of that asset. And I spoke earlier about the revenues associated with Basin View. These are the costs associated with Basin View. 833, and of course that will be zero for the current budget year. So that alone is almost $1.5 million of expenses that we will not incur this year on behalf of the taxpayer, because those programs are no longer implemented. So at the end of the day, the net cost that council is being asked to support is $21,064,000.
Mr. Dick, if I could just raise a question about the internet. We still have some payments to make as the buildup is completed. Are those being capitalized under the loan rather than here under the operating budget?
So what's going to happen is we've got this revenue stream that came in from the sale, and we will offset all the debt that we've incurred to date, which is whatever that number happens to be, and any future payments will be coming out of that to help us determine what the net profit will be once that deal is finally consummated.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions before we leave that slide? Oh, Councillor Longmire, I see you, yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to the Sports Hub, as that is a new place that we're going to be putting our support. I'm just wondering, will we get a breakdown or a breakout of the specifics of the maintenance on the Sports Hub?
If council just wishes for that, yes, we can give you a breakdown.
Thank you.
As I go back and forth, I don't see any other hands.
Mr. Warden,
Yes,
I have a question on the Sports Hub as well.
go ahead.
We were thinking of putting a new complex on for washroom facilities and equipment or something. Is that number of 44,000 include that, or that's just the upkeep of the Sports Hub?
That 44 is just maintenance costs. The cost that you're referring to, that's part of our capital budget. And Janice has finished her draft of the capital budget. We'll be reviewing that this week. We're presenting the capital budget to council maybe as soon as next week or the following week.
All right, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Okay,
So that's the budget in a nutshell. The next number of slides that I'll show you are just broken down by respective department. And it's just, to give council a better sense of what each department costs, but the narrative will probably be very similar. So I can speak to some of these issues again as we move forward. But I do want to show you this slide first. And if you go back to the second slide that I showed, what the net requirement was this year was 579,000. If council were to give us direction to say today, we want a zero increase, and I know that's not what they're going to do, but if they wanted a zero increase, that would mean we'd have to find another $160,000 in the budget. Given the assessment increase, and if we could find another $160,000 in the budget to net that increase from 579 to 419, that $140,000 house that paid $1,435 last year, now valued at $147,560, would pay $1,435. So as we move forward with our budget process, Angela and Shelley will be giving updates to every time there's a dollar change in that 579. We'll give you a sense of what that impact will be on the per average household. So we started off at $19. If council were to say do that and we'll approve the budget at 419, then we would find $160,000 in the taxes year over year would be the same. Okay.
Okay.
Again, I want to speak to, just generally the total number of staff that are in the budget. And as we go through this, you'll see me talking about people moving from Department A to Department B to Department A. Please don't try to add those up because I can't even add those up. But at the end of the day, it's 49 people versus 48.2 plus succession planning issues relating to GIS and building and fire inspections. So that we're anticipating hiring 3 new people this year in the current year. I'm not sure what the timing is. They are presently in the budget. 2 of them are in there at full-time rates. The 3rd position is only in there at half-time. Matter of fact, just before coming to the meeting, we've got some really good applications for the inspectors. So that could be sooner than we would have thought. But should council decide that they wanted to mitigate some of this increase or put the difference in reserves, my suspicion is we could probably take a little bit of those salaries off. A not significant amount, but we could take a little bit of those salaries off and either reduce the tax rate or put it directly to reserves. Again, I want to recognize that the previous year's balance for wages and benefits was incorrect. So to try to make a comparison between year and year is difficult. And again, professional development has been limited for all of us because of the pandemic. Just general year over year changes.
Ma'am?
Slide again. This is just narrative from me.
Mr.
Councillor Hudson?
Yes, back to the previous slide.
Right.
GIS, what's that for?
That's our information system for mapping and the work that Cheryl has done for you for border realignment. Boundary realignment. I call it border realignment, but the work that's been done in terms of do we go to 11 to 9 to 7? That's part of what the GIS department does. It does house mapping. It does access to parts of the county, and it's a geographical information system is what it is.
The second question is, so for this year, the actual number of staff is going to be 52?
Correct. If council approves it, yes.
Does that include the new engineer?
That the new engineer is still there from last year. So that's not a new position.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Sorry, the slide is just moving a little bit slower. One of them is okay. So again, I have a strong commitment to PD for staff and council. I know council hasn't really done a whole lot of PD over the last 12 months, but I strongly encourage them to engage in professional development, as I'm going to encourage staff to do the same thing. We talked about professional services. We talked about contracts, including IMSA and SAP and public prosecution services, provincial kilometers for maintenance. What is that? 50? What's the dollar value for that one? Somebody help me out on that one for the maintenance.
64,000.
What's it per kilometer?
Oh, 58.29, I think is what I found for.
$58.29 per kilometer. That's just a charge
5,800
per kilometer from the province for maintaining our roads. So we've lumped that into contracts. The grant program we spoke to, and maybe this says it better than what I was trying to explain it earlier today. And we talked about the hospice is included in there, as is the Trans County Transportation Society. Bridgetown community area rate now is representative of the charges that we're charging to Bridgetown specifically. And those are the only charges that we're going to see in the budget. I mean, we've got some summaries that you'll see a bunch of Bridgetown costs in there, but we've tried to break down Bridgetown community expenses into 5 categories. Town hall, which is $7,800. Debt, which is $117,000. Winter maintenance, which we've determined to be the services that they're getting in Bridgetown relative to everybody else is $74,000. Recreation is $49,000, and the fire protection costs are $46,000. So that will tie in exactly with the rates that we're recovering from Bridgetown community, which is about $295,000 relative to in excess of $400,000 last year.
Mr. Warden?
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Hudson.
Yes. In respect to the fire protection figure, 46,524, that's a figure from 2015. I guess I question why we're still using that figure.
Don or Cheryl, do you want to speak to that specifically?
I'm not sure it's the exact dollar figure. I believe it's been inflated the same rate that other operating grants have. I would have to look back to know for sure if it's to the exact dollar. It is at the same percentage as was provided for in 2015 when the Bridgetown community rate was established.
I guess I did some analysis of that, and based on my analysis and from on a spreadsheet that I did, it would appear to me that the fire protection in Bridgetown, the amount that is going to be paid from the community rate, what needs to be done is you need to look at the grants being paid to the other fire departments and see if there's fairness there. And I think if you look at it, you'll see that the fairness is not there. Well, I guess that's basically what I want to say. I do have this spreadsheet, which I can circulate to the council, for them to have a look at. And so if you would like, I will do that.
And certainly that if you wanted to provide that to council, I will just caution a couple of things I'll say. First of all is the level of service that's being provided to Bridgetown. We're trying to keep that funding source similar to what it was in 2014, 2015. We do recognize that there's a revenue requirement by each fire department, and each fire department has to raise funds on their own because we're not funding 100% of it. What we understand is that the cost for Bridgetown Fire Department includes those expenses that need to be funded by that community in Bridgetown. If we were to reduce that level of funding, our understanding is that they wouldn't have enough funds to operate the fire department. So that's number one. Number two is what we really need to do is we really need to sit down and talk about fire services and the funding that we're providing to fire services across the county. And I don't think we should be separating one community from others, because we have to recognize that there are some funding inequities across the board. And we need to address that with the fire association, and we need to address that with the towns. So what the plan is at some point, subject to council's strategic plan, is that we would think that we will, as staff, meet with the association and with the towns to talk about what the funding formula is going forward. If you think to it that we've got a funding formula for Annapolis Royal that's 80-20, is that the appropriate amount that we're funding 80% and they're funding 20? Reality is, in my opinion, it's probably not. But we need to have those discussions. We need to really sit down and look at what it really costs to operate a fire department and make sure that those costs are covered by whatever means they are, whether it's us, whether it's the towns, whether it's fundraising, whether it's other funding sources. And we don't have all that information yet. So I would caution council not to make any specific changes, because I'm not comfortable that any of the numbers are quite right, to be perfectly honest. But I think that that's something council should give direction to staff, that this is something we do in the next number of months, so we can come up with something that's consistent within the county and it's consistent with other fire departments across the province.
Councillor Hudson, if I could just interject for a minute. council has already agreed to put these headings under the Bridgetown Community Area Rate, although staff was going to come up with a calculation of the actual amounts, which we now see. Rather than you sending a spreadsheet to the councilors, let me suggest that if you have some difficulty with that $46,000 number, that you and Mr. Dick have a chat first. And if you can bring it back to council before we decide on the budget, then that's fine. But I don't think there's really much point in sending a spreadsheet to all the councilors until you and Mr. Dick have had a lengthy discussion.
Okay, fair enough.
And in fairness to Councillor Hudson, he did send us that last evening. Unfortunately, I just haven't had a chance to digest those numbers. So certainly we would respect it that we could do that going forward.
Thank you. Did you have another comment, Councillor Hudson?
No.
Okay.
Certainly in terms of some of the other year-over changes, we've spoken to the strategic initiatives, which include planning and the medical practitioner. And RCMP salary, we spoke
I
to that.
see Councillor Connell's been waving his hand.
Oh,
Okay, let me find him on my screen. Just a minute. I don't have Councillor Connell on my screen.
I'm here.
So go ahead, Councillor Connell. And meanwhile, Mr. Hopkins, can you try and see if I can get all the councillors on my screen at some point?
Yes, my concern again was the fire services. It's no good sending me a something that hasn't got all the information on it. Each fire station is different. There's a calculation on how many people they have and how it's set up. So until you get all that information, just sending me a number to thinking that one fire department's getting less than another fire department means nothing. There is a calculation, and I'm assuming they're being paid by that calculation. Just because they're the same size of building, same size of town, or representative, doesn't mean they get the same as other places. They may have, other places may have 10 more firefighters than Bridgetown. So I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in is that number was calculated for the area rate of Bridgetown when dissolve took place. And if we're not gonna, if other councillors feel that we shouldn't pay it, then it don't get paid to them. And like the CAO says that the fire service review hopefully will take place and we'll get some of that straightened out. And we'll know more on how much it costs to run all them fire departments. But I know that each fire department does do their own fundraising, and we know they shouldn't be punished for that. So no, I just wanted to put that forward.
Thank you. I don't see any. I now have. Oh, just a second, Councillor Redden, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Warden. I was wondering if staff could give us a couple of comments on the mechanism the fire service dollars are raised through, and some background or things around the community about how these funds are raised and delivered and all that sort of thing. And I'd like to have it from the source. Thanks.
Do you want that? You're asking that now, or is that something you want to have in the future?
No, I'd love to have some comment now, and then maybe
Okay.
more detail in the future. It'd be lovely as well. Yeah.
Can you respond, Mr. Dick, to that?
yeah, Cheryl or Don, do you want to take a stab at that?
I'm not sure that I understand the question. Could you just give me the overview of that again?
I guess I'm curious, are the fire protection capital costs raised by like an area rate, or are they just a piece of our tax rate calculation, or are they something else entirely?
Sure. So capital is absolutely by rate. Kingston Fire Department being the anomaly in the 11 fire departments that we fund, because as a fire commission, they get to set their own area rate to raise their capital. Our area rate for all of our other 10 fire departments follows a very similar amount. And it raises the 800 and odd thousand that was shown on an earlier slide by the CAO that will be available for fire departments to withdraw from for their qualifying capital expenditures. And following the procedures that we've laid down, I'll just throw that in. The operating funding is based on a formula that was established more than a decade ago. There were several things that were taken into consideration when that formula was established. Number of firefighters, number of trucks, services provided to a degree, costs for training, those kinds of things. We would be looking at a slightly more complex matrix for examination this time. That 700 some odd thousand that was in a previous slide the CAO showed you comes directly from our general operating. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that was a lot of wonderful information. I don't think it quite answered what I'm trying to articulate. So I see on our slide here, we've got X number of dollars per thousand of assessment. So that's, I guess what I'm asking, this isn't, so many cents in our general tax rate. This is a separate area rate?
For the capital, yes.
Yes. Oh, okay. That's what I was trying to get around to understanding, I guess. It's not some separate mechanism in the MGA or anything like that, I guess, is my question.
No, it is under the MGA in that the process to set it up will follow the MGA to provide for manners in which municipalities might establish area rates. That is one of the eligible things in the MGA, and that was the process that was used in council's consideration to decide to levy an area rate for capital purposes for fire departments. And I believe that rate is 0.611.
Yes.
Right. So as an area rate we've levied for a specific thing, we're kind of obligated to spend it there, but we're not obligated to spend it. Like, these are tax dollars that are ultimately under the discretion of council.
I would say that the area rate, the purpose for which the area rate was established has to be the purpose for which the expenditures are made. Otherwise, we don't have authority to expend the funds.
Okay. Thanks, Don.
Councilor Butko?
Yeah, I think on the slide, there must be a typo because, and maybe what Don said clarified that for me. The fire capital based on $6.11, it says. I think it should be 0.611, not 6.11, because that would be, I was just looking at per thousand, that would be a huge amount more so than what we're seeing now. So I just wanted to make sure that got clarified.
That was really just to satisfy the firefighters. Yes, that's my fat finger. Sorry, Councillor.
Thank you.
They're trying to confuse you, Clyde.
Yeah.
6.11 is per $1,000 of assessment. The 0.611 is per $100 of assessment.
Well, if you take $1,000 and just go up to an average assessment, or even you just put up to 100,000, you're moving the decimal 2 points. Well, that would make, how much would it make per average household? Of we've had that target point up before per average $140,000 property, and I was just kind of curious what this would relate to it, how that would work.
Mr. If I could pass this back to staff, Mr. Dick, is that number correct? Or Ms. Campbell? I tend to agree with Councillor Hudson that it's 0.611 per $100 of assessment, so it would be 6.11 per thousand, but I'm not sure.
So
So
if
if
you
I
multiply that by
may-
100, that would be $611 per 100,000. So that doesn't seem right. So I think the decimal's wrong.
Mr. Dick, can someone there clarify where the decimal point should be on that?
Go ahead, Don.
0.611 per hundred.
What did you say, Ms. Campbell?
0.00.
Sorry.
0.00611 per $100 of assessment.
Right.
When we're
6 cents per
transposing
thousand.
from cents to fractions of cents, that gets very complex when we're doing it per a unit per assessment, but that is what it is, 0.006111 per $100 of assessment.
So that would be 0.611 per thousand, not $6.11.
Correct.
So
Okay.
that's a
Thanks for
typo, I guess.
clarifying that. Yep. Good catch.
And just keep it on the Bridgetown rate. The question was asked about the extra that goes into the area rate. I think the town in its wisdom supported the Bridgetown a lot more when it was the town of Bridgetown, not the municipality, and it lessened the need for them to do their individual fundraising like the other departments do. So maybe that's all supported through that. That was the way I understood it.
And it's a difficult concept because of the level of service that we're providing each other, the intermunicipal service agreements between the fire departments. It's a difficult concept to try to understand because this fire department is helping this fire department, which is helping this fire department, which is helping this fire department. So it's not a, yes, I mean, you were a volunteer firefighter, you know the difficulty in managing it. And to try to determine the appropriate level of financing is even more difficult. So I'm getting rid of this page.
Oh,
We don't have to talk about it anymore. Transfers to reserves. Sorry, we've spoken to the waste management price increases and the housing authority and the school board. And if council wants, this is just that bigger picture in a smaller form by department. If you wanted to look at those numbers, I'm happy to just walk through those numbers with you at the same time.
Mr. Dick, I had a question on this slide and others. You have office, and I didn't really understand what office meant in these slides. It looks to me like you're dividing up certain costs, but could you explain that to me?
That's everything that is not included in wages, community grants, professional development, and things like that. So it's things like, for example, in office, you'll have insurance, you'll have dues for FCM and things like that. It's things that aren't in any of the other categories. So it's just sort of a catch-all for things that are not easily identifiable and clear. They're all relatively small in dollar values.
Okay.
So you'll see that throughout the budget, and that's really all it is, just, postage cost and things like of that nature.
Okay, I see the hospice there. We'll come back to that when we finish.
Right.
Councillor Hudson?
Yes, the wages and benefits is up 50-odd thousand or something like that. Can you tell me the reason behind that?
That is just what the anticipated salary increases will be for council and the warden. And if you'll recall last year, I think, if I recall, I was still in Ontario at the time, but I think what council decided to do was not have increases. We've increased it based on that 2% threshold, and the benefits are based on what the benefits are. I think we've anticipated that to be roughly 14% for council. It's about 14% of wages.
Okay, thank you.
So if we go to the community grants, we've spoken to that earlier, and that's really that 200,000 plus the 50,000 plus some other small amounts. Again, professional development is less than what was budgeted last year. We did virtually zero last year. As I understand it, there was a discussion last week about some council wanting to go to FCM. And if that was the decision that council wanted to make, that 1 or 2 or 3 people would go, I strongly suggest the council avails themselves of these types of programs for a number of reasons that I've spoken to. And I've always felt that 38,000 probably isn't enough, to be perfectly honest. I think the benefit that council gets by networking with colleagues from across the province in the country is even more valuable than it is at the staff level. That's my own personal view. Intermunicipal service agreement we've spoken to, office, the ward just spoke to that. And then those are the two other items that I wanted to specifically identify as part of the budget process for the council expenditures.
Councillors, I'm happy to say that Mr. Hopkins has worked his magic, and I can now see all of you to the right-hand side of my screen. So you can put up your hand if you want to say something, and I should be able to recognize you. Thank you.
So with no further ado, I'll jump to the next slide. And
Councillor Longmire had her hand up.
Thanks,
darn,
Warden.
I was trying to sneak away, darn.
Thank you, Warden. I just wanted to say to David how impressed I am that you recognize the importance of education for everyone. It's absolutely necessary. Thank you.
No, it's extremely important for me. I mean, you know, I think back to my history when I was starting out as a young CA. It was mandatory for practice development. We have to get so many hours, and even now I have to report annually how many PD hours that I get. And I don't know what it is anymore. I think it's 21 hours a year, and then every couple of years it's 35 hours. So it's extremely important for all of us, because I'm looking at how do we do our jobs better? And the only way we do our jobs better is if we learn from others. So thank you for that comment. It's something I believe in very closely. I don't personally do much PD. I'm too old, but and it's like the old dog can't learn new tricks. That's me. But all these young people in this room can all learn.
Never too old to learn.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
That might be true. Okay, so the next one is my department. And again, you'll look at a significant increase in salaries, and that's because I've moved people around. And Nadine, who used to be in, I'm not even sure what department it was, recreation or planning or something, she's now included in my department. So that's why you'll see that there's an increase year over year. And for the rest of it, again, strategic initiatives, we spoke about that. That's medical recruitment and the strategic planning process. And the community rate, please don't ask me what that is because I don't know. So that's generally, you know, year over year, there's not a whole lot of change in the CAO department. And again, if you want to at your leisure, this is just an explanation that we've spoken to a number of times already. The next one is finance overall increase. It's gone up by 700 or up to 799. And again, this is another one of those staff relocations. So I'm trying to get this straight in my own head. So if you don't follow this, don't worry, because I don't either. We've only added one new body throughout the corporation. And that new body really is in a finance role. So, but we will have 3 new people in finance by the time the year is over. And that's only because we've reorganized our department somewhat, where people that were reporting in other departments, for example, will be moving into the finance department. So the one that I can think of on the top of my head is procurement, but that position is typically being in public works, and we're moving that into the finance department because it's really a finance role. I mean, a finance role in the sense that that's corporate as opposed to specific department. So that position is also included in that increase year over year. So it's the one new body plus a reallocation from another department to this department. And when I said earlier, try not to get too tied up with the numbers when I say these people are moving around, because it's probably going to add up to more than one person, but that's because we omitted 3 people 3 years ago. As confusing as that sounds, I think I understood what I said. Professional development.
Excuse me,
That's
Councillor
nice.
Councillor Hudson, you have a question?
Yes, I guess, Mr. Warden, you didn't see my hand in respect to the previous slide, had to do with the CAO department. Just wondering if you could just mainly, in the office, you said that that's basically a catch-all. What were the major things that caused the increase of 210,000?
Which department are you looking at? Sorry.
CAO.
Oh, sorry. CAO.
Yeah. You got
So-
an actual of 10,500, and you got a budget of 220,000. And I just wondered what, you said those were a catch-all sort of an account, but what is the major items that represent that increase?
I think help me out here, is that, God, I should know that. Somebody help me out here. Communication officer, pension, previously professional development, strategic planning. Just trying to think if we've got legal expenses. Sorry, Don, thank you.
I know one of the significant things was that we had never accounted for the pension for the previous.
Yeah, that's like 27,000, but why is it? Oh, you know, Council, if you look at the budget to budget, we're only up by 15,000. Remember, the actual numbers don't have all the right numbers in it. So we've only gone up, I was concerned, how did I go up 210,000? I didn't notice that. So that's including, I think is not sure if SAP is in there. The cost for SAP and some of the consulting work is included in there, I think. I will get back to you, but it's only a $10,000 increase budget over budget.
I realize that, but I'm basically looking for budget over budget, yes, but I'm
Yes.
looking actual.
So yeah, don't worry about the actuals. As I said earlier, the actual numbers haven't been updated. And so some of the actual expenses are in other categories.
The community representation.
Okay.
I'll get back to the specifics that are in the 200. I apologize. I just don't recall what that is at the moment.
But the office budget, if I may,
Go ahead, Councillor LeBlanc.
wouldn't that include like your training, education, registration, professional memberships and dues and fees and whatever? Would
That would all be in the 44,000, just above that 220,000.
That 44,000 would cover all those? Okay.
Yeah. I'll get back to you on that. What's in the 220,000? I apologize. I just don't recall what it is off the top of my head.
Councillor Hudson, you have another question?
No, I'm sorry, I just, no.
Mr. Dick, if you could go to the next slide after the one you've got up there now. I'm just curious, under the second bullet, pension for the previous clerk.
Right. So the MGA provided up until, I'm not sure what date it was, that clerks got a pension for life.
1999.
So that was 1999. So the previous clerk that worked here, I don't even know who the individual is getting a pension from us every year. We never reported that pension last year. So all of a sudden we have this hit. I think it's about $24,000 that we have to account for this year. We have to pay it every year. We just didn't record it in our budget last year.
So the 23,000 is the cumulative.
No, that's just an annual basis. We just never booked it last year.
It was booked in the previous years.
Yeah, we never budgeted for it. We paid it, but we've never budgeted for it. Well, I shouldn't say we've never budgeted. We certainly didn't budget for it the previous year.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Thank you.
Okay, back to, hold on, finance. Okay, and that was the one I was speaking to in terms of the year over year incremental people in the department, and it's really just one, but it's just a matter of moving certain people from public works to the finance department. When we go our way down, you'll see office expenses are 160,000, and I don't know if I have the specific reasons for those. Let me see if I can see anything here. The other increases are liability insurance in the insurance one, and we moved a lot of the legal expenses into certain departments. So last year they were spread throughout because there was I guess a reason to try to hide legal expenses in previous years. So what I'm trying to do is accumulate them in 1 or 2 or 3 different accounts as opposed to having them in 15 accounts. So that's part of what the explanation is for increase in expenses in the finance department. And the tax rebates, I think we've spoken to that already.
Oh,
let me just see.
Yeah, Councillor Hudson, you have your hand up?
yes. Again, what are the major items under professional services included in that 230,700?
So that's legal. legal expenses, audit services. Those are the two major ones. So the audit's about 25,000. And throughout the budget, we're probably looking at overall legal fees of probably in the neighborhood of 300 to 350.
What was that amount again?
300 to 350,000. Again, we're not putting it all in one account, but we're putting it into the respective departments.
Okay, thank you.
HR and IT overall, year over year, it's actually gone down in budget. And again, that's another one of those areas where we're allocating staff from one department to another department. So last year we had people splitting time between HR and other departments. Now we've moved them into other departments. IT has virtually stayed the same year over year. I think the difference really is just a person that was listed in the HR department is no longer there. It's in a different department this year. So if you look at the other expenses, for the most part, they're all fairly consistent. Office is the one, again, that's just a catch-all, and I can get some breakdown for council if they want the specifics in office throughout the budget. And communication software, again, that's one of those fluctuating things that depending on when we get licenses to be renewed, the expense this year is expected to be about 75,000 based on certainly the software licenses that we need.
Mr. Dick, just a general question, really. Again, office, on your budget for HR and IT, it's gone up quite a bit from the budget. It's gone up quite a bit from the actual, which you say isn't to be relied upon. So I just wonder how you get that number of 96,000.
So I just suggested that I will provide a breakdown of each of the office accounts year over year, so council can get a sense of what's in office.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
IT we spoke to. Protection to persons and property. And this is again primarily fire departments and RCMP. So you'll see that it's gone up by 300 and some odd thousand dollars, and that's primarily again due to the increase in salaries for the RCMP. And for the most part, we discussed the fire and protection, capital and operations, and really everything else is fairly consistent year over year.
Obviously, the RCMP is a big number, and we have 14 or 15 that we pay for. I know the answer to my question. I don't think we've done any analysis as to whether 14's enough or not enough or too many. That's the only comment I make, is that it's a big amount of money, and there should be, I think, some determination as to whether that's the right number, because it's very expensive.
Right.
So it's the only comment. I'm not saying to change anything. I'm just voicing my views.
Agreed. So if we jump to this one, that's our Remo and animal control at the top. And as you can see, the numbers are fairly consistent with what they were last year. And again, the main difference is just a reallocation of wages between departments. And we're trying to put people in, at least portions of people in their respective departments where they're investing their time. And the bottom one is the building and fire inspections. And that's where you see a significant increase in the salary. And that's because we are anticipating sometime in the next number of years, short period of time, that both our inspectors are going to consider retirement. And because it is a long process to have inspectors trained properly, and certainly in terms of fire inspection, where there's really no requirements now, but they are changing, and they will be having requirements for professional development going forward, we're anticipating hiring 2 additional ones this year. So we would expect to have 4 throughout the year, subject to making sure that we're in a position that if and when those building inspectors decide to officially retire, that we're not left with those building inspectors. And I will say that this is an experience that municipalities are feeling not only in the province, throughout the country. There is a significant lack of inspectors, both at the fire and the building level, that everybody is looking for them across the country. So as I mentioned earlier, we think we might have a line on a couple of them. And in spite of the fact that, it's difficult for me to say I want 4 building inspectors when we only have 2 now, It's one of those situations where you really can't pass up on opportunity, because in a year or two's time, when we both inspectors decide to retire, we can't survive without having them. If we don't have building inspectors, for example, we can't have any building in the county. So this is one of those preemptive things. Again, the budget is projecting those 2 inspectors effective April 1. Well, obviously that's not going to happen. So there is a little bit of room to maneuver on terms of the salaries, but certainly it is my opinion to maintain all 4 of them in the budget for the current year. And of course, the cost associated with that PD is going to go up because now we have to train 2 new people, and the associated travel and office expenses, because now we're going from 2 to 4, will increase accordingly, as well as vehicles. And the likelihood is we may have to buy additional vehicles to accommodate the additional staff.
Councillor Hudson, you have a question?
Yes, just my clarification. Previously, we said that complement, the staffing would go up to 52. So does this represent additional 2? So
this is part of the 52. So we're at 49. So these 2 would bring us up to 51. And then we've got another one in the GS department.
Okay. Well, so that increase, those are the positions that are currently advertised, are they?
They're currently advertised, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Public Works. Again, this is the big variance here is the wage and benefit line. And again, that's primarily due to the employees that were hired in 2019 that were never reflected in the budget. So that's, you'll see that there's a $300 and some odd thousand increase, and that's primarily due to those three bodies, plus the fact that we negotiated our QB agreement, as I understand it, in late 2019, and we never reflected those increases in the budget in 2020 or 2021. So this is sort of a catch-all for those years that we missed. And if you look at the rest of it, I think that's primarily the big change in costs. There's the road costs that we talked about earlier. That's some maintenance costs with the province that's gone up. But other than that, our costs are fairly consistent with at least what the budgets were in previous years.
Deputy Warden, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. And I'd like to thank Mr. Dick and his staff for, this is one of the better budgets and the better budget presentation I've seen since I've been here in these chambers or in and around council. And I would make a motion and I would move that Annapolis County Council approve the 2022-23 operating budget as presented at the Special Committee of the Whole on 2022, the 4th month, the 26th day.
But we haven't finished the presentation yet.
Yeah, well, I'll just get it on the table. Thank you.
Mr. Dick, we're going to go along and finish your presentation with the slides we got the other day, are we not?
No, I like to hear what Councilor or Deputy Warden Gunn said. I'm happy with that.
I know you are. But shouldn't we finish your presentation before?
Oh, no, I'm just kidding.
And over 5 minutes.
Yes, I know. It's a long 5 minutes. My watch has stopped. It's only 9:33. Budget for transit, we spoke to this, and this is based on the numbers that King's Transit has provided to us. I've started doing an analysis on the revenues and expenditures. I have a number of questions, but unfortunately that's secondary to the county budget. So once we get through this, then I can start addressing some of those issues. Sewer, really no need to talk too much about sewer because council approved this budget last Tuesday. So these are just a collection of the expenses and the offset revenues that council approved in terms of the new rates. Waste management, again, relatively not small in terms of dollars, but there's not a lot of activity in here other than the cost for pickup and removal and the whole maintenance of waste. And you can see that a number of years ago, we had salaries of $138,000 because we had actually allocated 3 staff members, I believe, to the West Paradise site. So now you'll see 25.8, and that's really just because we're allocating some public works time to some of the waste management issues, and that's just a portion of person A's time and a portion of person B's time and a portion of person C's time. So that's why there is a salary there, although there's nobody dedicated 100% of the time to waste management. And the rest of it is just the cost of operating and picking up waste.
Councillor Barto?
Yeah, just going back to, I think it was the Public Works or whatever, there was you're saying you're adding 2 positions, but it doubled the amount of wage and benefits by a tune of an extra 200,000. It seems like a lot to add 2 people.
Well, the one of the things that we have recognized, and that's including benefits, by the way, but one of the things that we've recognized is that because there's such a strong demand for building inspectors, the associated rate that we pay our building inspectors may have to be adjusted. So we want to err on the conservative side. I believe that it's probably a little bit high, but I don't want to be in a position where we come back and say, we thought that we could get them for salary A and it's salary A plus B.
Well, hopefully we have lots of surplus. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And community development. The big change in community development is last year, if you recall, we had agreed that we were hiring 2 planners that are now full-time in our planning department. And this also includes the tourism department, which was non-existent last year at this time. So it really is implementing that tourism component, the outreach department that Deborah Ryan is running. So this is now included in this department. So that's the main reason why the salaries have increased as much as they have. And that's because we've got an extra body in this department relative to where they were last year. And then you'll see down below that the $150,000 for professional services, and that's the contract that was awarded to Stantec. And that's funded, that was funded here, but it was being funded, if I understand it, and I stand to be corrected, through gas tax. But it was listed as an operating item last year. And if you look at the office expenses, they've increased significantly. And a lot of that has to do with the official plan and the community meetings and the advertising and some of the other components that we have for that, plus the additional costs associated with the tourism department that you'll see in other departments. They've been moved from some of those from recreation, for example, into this department. So overall, again, yes, the number is a bit higher, but it's really because we moved tourism and outreach into this category.
Councillor Hudson?
Yes, but going back to wages and benefits, the 631,793, that does not include a director's position?
There is a director position still there, yes.
It's included in that 631?
It's included in that, yes.
Okay.
If I could follow up on that, I had a similar question. So Mr. Dick, you've budgeted for 3 people in the planning department, the 2 that we have plus a director. Is that my understanding?
So that would be the director, the manager, the planners, and the tourism director.
Sorry, that's 5, but just the planning department.
Yeah, that's 5. So the planning department right now is the director, the manager, and the 2 planners. That's in the planning department.
That's 4 people.
Yeah, and the community development is inclusive of tourism and outreach. So that's 5 people.
So is Linda the deputy? Is that?
Linda is the manager of community development at the moment.
She's the manager. So there's 4 people from the planning department that you've budgeted for, the director to fill that position, plus the manager, plus the 2 that we have there. Is that my understanding?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Longmire?
Thank you, Warden. David, will we be able to get that organizational chart? I just think that'll help us significantly.
Definitely.
Yes,
Already been sent.
before Thursday.
Pardon me?
Already sent.
It's already been sent.
Oh, good, thank you.
Well, no, thank Don and Kate. It wasn't.
Thank you too as well.
Okay, and housing and education, really, these are services that we have no control over, and we're just collecting and refunding to those respective departments, but they do form part of our budget. And recreation, again, we talked throughout the budget of people being moved from department to department to department. So you'll see that there's a significant decrease in the wage component associated with recreation. And that's because last year, Deborah was included in this department. She's not there this year. And we've just changed some of the mechanism. We've moved somebody from what was considered parks and trails last year. That was a recreation project that's now in public works. So there's just, the overall numbers don't change globally, but they do change by department. Professional development, we've spoken to that. Certainly the bottom three, we've spoken to that. And again, office insurance, maintenance, fuel, utilities, and grants. Don, can you help me out what's included in that number off the top of your head?
Sorry, I'm a little out of the loop on that one. Which one?
In your recreation, office insurance, just what else is included in your budget besides salaries and professional development? Is there anything that just jumps out at you?
Equipment for sure. And we are kind of plowing new ground with some of the activities that we're doing this year. We're going to be doing a needs assessment to have some consultation with the community. And we're also looking at different programs and trying to run some programs we've not done for quite some time, like day camps, that kind of thing. So there's a lot associated with the operation, and there's also special activities like Camp Today, for example.
Okay, thank you. And subject to questions, that's pretty much the end of this presentation.
Councillor Hudson?
Yes, going back to the budget for recreation. Through the presentation, you said that, well, I'll use the person's name. You said that Nadine went from recreation to the CAO. You also said through the presentation that it's just that staff moved from recreation to CAO and community development. Basically, I just want, how many people are going to be left in recreation?
2.5.
You've shuffled them around.
Well, if you don't count me, it's 1.5.
It's 1.5 plus summer students and winter students, winter, whatever we call them in the winter programs.
1 and then 1.5.
Correct. So, I mean, if you think about Nadine specifically, she wasn't doing recreation. She's communications for the most part. That's just where her salary got lumped. So that's really not a fair estimation to say that it's one less person because she wasn't doing recreation. So recreation was Deborah, and Deborah was doing a lot of the tourism and outreach stuff that she's doing now anyway. So we've just created that department. So you have to remember that when we say it's recreation, we don't have a specific recreation department. We don't have a specific tourism department because everybody here has to work together. So Deborah's doing some work in terms of maybe we can do something at the south side of Upper Cummins Park. Is that tourism or is that recreation or is it public works? So a number of us will be working on that same initiative. We just need to put it into certain silos as to where we allocate those salaries just so we can identify them. But at the end of the day, because of just the nature of what we do, I don't think that it's strictly a recreation department because we also had recreation and trails that used to be in recreation and now that's in public works. So it's hard to say that it's year over year. It's 2.5 people last year, 1.5 people this year. Because at the end of the day, as Don just said, we're looking at providing additional programming going forward. So if we provide additional programming, we will be providing, the appropriate staff level to do that, whether it's staff that are casual, part-time, temporary, or whatever the circumstances will be, but they're in the budget as it stands.
Just one final question. In terms of full-time staff and recreation, that's full-time. So you only have Nancy?
We have Nancy and
50% of Brian.
50% of Brian Orr, who's also 50%.
Okay.
And so last year it was Nancy and Deborah, I believe. Right? So it's a half a person less. But again, if you were to ask Deborah, she probably is going to tell you that what she's doing now is very similar to what she did last year. We call it tourism, but it's really recreation as well.
So this would be the appropriate time, I think, to come back to the issue of the $50,000 for the hospice that we said that we would discuss at the end. There's a suggestion that we should put this off for another year. Council hasn't really had a discussion about it, although my sense from council is that council would be agreeable to pledging that amount. But no doubt the pledge would be conditional, the project going ahead with other financing. So there's been some discussion. Is there anyone in there would like to move that we take this out of the current budget for another year, or shall we leave it? Would someone make a motion? Councillor Hudson?
I'll make that motion.
Which motion? It be removed?
To remove it.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that motion? I don't see a seconder. Councillor Barto, are you seconding the motion? Yeah. Discussion? Councillor Redden?
So going back to my memory, their financial model was sort of raise funds as they go to build this operation. So for example, the funds they'd already raised, they'd use to do various bits of planning and things like that. And they were moving into architectural work and this sort of thing. So when they asked for that funding, my understanding of their ask had been that they were asking for it more currently to further development and not necessarily for their final build cost down the road in a couple of years. That was my understanding. So if I've understood them correctly, I would much rather leave this in the budget. But that might also be something we want clarification from them on when they were expecting their asks to come through. And I'm also in favor of it going to reserve for the future. That's but Mr. Dick covered most of that. So.
Councillor Sheridan?
So in saying that, going forward and giving it to them immediately, if on their ask, what protection do we have if the project does not go forth? Is that a concern, or is there an agreement in place that they return the funds if the project doesn't take place?
Mr. Dick, can you respond to that question?
They haven't made, as I understand it, an official ask yet. And I sort of like the direction that council's going in terms of this. And I think it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. My suggestion might be this: leave it in the budget. We will allocate it to a reserve tomorrow, for example, that'll go for a hospice, and we will only disperse that funding when an appropriate ask has been made and approved by council. So that could be this year, that could be next year. So it'll just stay there until such time as there's an official ask for it.
So once they ask, sorry, can I?
Go ahead, Councillor Sheridan.
So once they do ask for it and the project does not move forth, but they just have this in their bank account, are we protected that we get that money back? I guess is the question.
So my gut's going to tell me probably not, but that's why I would say if we leave it in our reserve, I can't take it out of that reserve until I get council's permission. So they would have to come and make a formal ask, and council would have to determine at that point, is this a project that's going to go forward? If it's going to go forward, then council will say, yes, you're allowed to release those funds from reserves.
Thank you. I think the reserve is the way to go, and that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Councillor Prout?
Thank you. I would agree with Councillor Redden and Councillor Sheridan that I think, and the CAO, that if you leave it in this budget, it's put in a reserve. Council has to be approached by the Hospice Foundation and asked to release a bit of money, or hopefully not all at once, but and that would be our decision to make. Or we could say, look, you need to establish a bit more of a foundation before we'll sort of make this a drop in your lap. I'll be voting against the motion as it stands to take it out of this year's budget, but I do agree with putting it in a reserve where the council maintains control of it. Thank you.
Councillor Longmire?
Thank you, Warden. I would agree as well with Councillor Sheridan. The reserve for me is the way I would proceed. I know we were using the language, go to completion, or how do we incorporate a clause that protects us if we do release funds, that it is completed. It's one thing that it moves forward, but completion is a completely different thing. And I know that from the presentation that they had discussed extensions from the hospice into long-term care and such. And although I'm in total agreement with hospice and moving forward with it, I wouldn't want us to get caught up in dispersing funds that moves through into another area, getting ahead of the hospice, if that makes any sense. Thank you.
Councillor Barto?
Yeah, maybe through you, Warden, to CAO. I, in concept, am in favor of putting the money maybe in a reserve if we so desire to leave it in the budget. But by what I heard, it was like putting it in a reserve for the hospice. If the hospice doesn't go ahead, have we pigeonholed that money somewhere where we can't reallocate it to something else and get it out of there by putting it in a designated reserve for that project? What kind of legal problems would we have in putting that money there at this point, unless we put it into something that's more generalized as a health promotion reserve or that we can draw from, but it's earmarked for that. I have my concerns on exactly, just saying globally that we'll do this. Well, it's not quite that simple, I don't believe.
Mr. Dick, can you respond to Mr.?
I'm going to ask Nancy Komodo to respond, but I will tell you the experience I have is if it's a reserve, you can change it at any point. Reserve funds, which we don't have in Nova Scotia, are different. They are more restrictive in what you can do. I just don't know if the rules are the same in Nova Scotia. So Nancy, if they put it into a reserve for the hospice and in 6 months' time or 8 months' time, it's not going to happen, can they reallocate that to an operating reserve, for example?
Yes.
Yes, she's saying yes, so you could do that. So there's no restrictions on it. It's just more for us to identify that that's what it's for.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Connell?
Yeah, I'm gonna be voting against the motion because I believe we got to prepare ourselves for the future, and this is a project that's well needed, and especially in the west end of the county. And I try to look forward to the future of councils coming in and stuff, and so I appreciate reserves. So I'm definitely against the motion.
Councillor LeBlanc?
I think we should have the question.
I didn't bring I wanted to speak to it, but you're next on, you're next in line, and I wasn't on my list, so I think that
I can't help that.
I think that to proceed to call the question needs a 2/3 vote. So I will ask council, all those in favor of calling the question, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed calling the question? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess 6 went
No,
to
we're not
Four.
11.
You're 10.
We're 10.
we're 10, yeah. So
Oh, that's too much.
I think, look, unless someone else wants to speak, I won't say anything and we'll call for the vote. I did want to express my views, but,
That's exactly 2/3, isn't it?
well,
4 to 6.
Will it go faster if I
no,
pull my
not quite.
question and then you
2/3
can
would be
speak?
7. We need 7 to call the question. I believe I'm correct.
10 councilors?
I think it requires a 2/3 vote to cut off discussion. Madam Clerk, can you help me out on that?
Only if someone can tell me what 2/3 of 10 is.
Well, it's
6 and 2/3.
You need 7. Yeah, you need 7. You need 7.
7, yeah. You should
You
speak.
need-
Ward.
If you need 7, then
Oh,
the motion is lost.
4 over 6, you just bring that down by simple math. It's 2 over 3, that's 2/3.
No, it's
Isn't that
6
correct?
over 10. It's 6 over 10.
6 over 10. Oh, okay. I was using the. opposed
So
to- okay.
unless someone else, let me just say my piece and then we'll vote on it. I'm going to vote in favor of the motion simply because, and as I said, I'm all in favor of the hospice. I think it's a terrific idea. I really like it. I'd like to see it proceed. My difficulty is raising funds from our taxpayers today for something that, to be honest with you, I think he's got a long way to go to raise funds to make this project go forward. And I'd be happy to council discuss it and agree to have a pledge of the $50,000, but it would be payable in my view when he raised enough money to prove that this was going to go ahead, and which I think is at least a year away. So I'm in favor of the motion for what it's worth. I understand that most of the councilors seem to be voicing a different opinion, but that's where I sit on it. So unless someone else has something else to say, Councilor Sheridan?
Just want to clarify, another counselor mentioned previously, this was a 4-year, 50,000 times 4. Is that correct? Or is it just a 50,000 one-time ask?
Mr. Dick?
I believe it was for a number of years. I think it was 4.
Okay, thank you.
But we're not committing ourselves to anything if we reserve the 50, I take it, Mr. Dick?
No.
In fact, council hasn't really discussed this at this point. We just heard the ask.
Mhm.
Anyway, the motion on the floor is to remove the 50,000 for this current budget. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think I got 4. All those opposed, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That adds up to 10. The motion's lost. Thank you, council. Good discussion. Mr. Dick, is there anything else we need to cover?
I think you have to go back to Deputy Warden's motion. I'm just kidding when I say that, but you will have to eventually. But I would like council to at least give some thought to, are there things that you want to include that has not been discussed by staff at this point?
Before we answer that, are we going to require the meeting on Thursday?
My guess is yes. And I would, if you would approve the budget today, there's some HR issues that I'd like to speak to council about and closed in any event. So we could still do that on Thursday.
So that would give us time. You asked us to think about something else. Maybe, are you suggesting maybe, I don't know if council's had time to really think about it. We only got some of this material yesterday, last evening. And just on the process, are we actually, to prove the budget, we need to do that in a council meeting, not a committee of the whole, right?
Right, yes.
And
So
we're in a committee.
Really what I'm asking, Mr. Warden, is there anything, so we presented a budget that council seems to be relatively happy with. But have you as a group thought about, is there something else we'd want to do? And this is not a good example, but it's an example. If we had money aside for medical recruitment, you may as a group decide we would like to put some money aside for medical recruitment. Or if you thought, for example, that we think that we want to build a new building in 5 or 6 or 7 years, do we want to start putting money aside for a building that we might want to build in 5 or 6 or 7 years? It's really those things that are really, what we presented from staff is sort of a status quo budget with the exception of a few of these incremental items. But does council have some ideas about things that they want to do going forward? I'm not saying we have to do that for the budget, but that's certainly something that we should be discussing. If not today, we can be discussing for future budgets that, yes, we want to do this, or we want to do this, or we want to put a splash pad up, for example. Let's start investing money in a splash pad, for example. So that's really what I'm asking for.
Okay, I see a couple of hands up. Councillor Connell?
My concern is that if we're looking at projects, that it probably should go under our capital.
Agreed.
Because we'd be looking for contribution funding from other sources.
True.
Just not the tax rate. So I would think that I'm very pleased with the presentation of the budget and the running of the county. Myself, projects, like I say, are probably more in my mind to be the capital way to go, because we would want to be seeing if we come up with a project, what kind of additional funding would we be accessible to?
And I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. I saw Councillor Bartot's hands up next.
Thank you. I guess my question is similar, and it's related to projects. I think the county doesn't want to be stagnant. We have to move forward. Just for example, the solar project that was put back to the Economic Development Committee. There's things in progress in the talking stages. If there's probably other things that may come up totally unrelated to that, that may be good things. Now, this is an operational budget, and you said that the capital budget wasn't ready yet. How does that all interrelate to the go forward related to projects and how we vote on this budget? This budget is all balanced on the income and everything, but where does the capital come from? Just reserves, and outside sources? Do we want to include anything in this budget for the go forward for economic initiatives?
So that's a good point. So that's a very good discussion about the capital budget here being separate from operating. Again, my experience, and I suspect Angela's, is there's a lot of capital expenditures that are funded out of the tax rate. We don't do that here. So at the end of the day, we're not planning to spend tax dollars for any of our capital projects that will be presented to you hopefully as early as next week. The reality is I would prefer to see both budgets passed at the same time, but it should council decide that they're happy with the budget as it is today, that at least gives us the opportunity to move and present the capital budget, give you some alternatives associated with that, and then we can approve both budgets at the same time. And again, when we approve the operating budget and the capital budget, we also have to approve all the area rates. So I don't know how we do it here, but there's a bylaw that'll have all the different rates in it. And I suspect the best way to do it is all at the same time.
I have
Right in the area
Councillor-
rates.
Sorry, Councillor Bartot, you weren't finished? Do you have a follow-up?
No. So basically, what we do today isn't the final stamp on it. It's basically where we're sitting in committee of the whole. We're saying to move this ahead to council for approval, and then you're saying in the meantime the other budget will come through the cycle, and then we can approve them both at the same time at a later date.
That would be my wishes. Yes.
Yeah. So what's on the plate for Thursday?
Well, I wasn't anticipating being quite as far along as we are today, although I did say 5 minutes. But there are some HR issues that Dawn and Kate would like to have a conversation with council about. So I was hoping to do that today, and then, it would be budget for the rest of the time. But I suspect we might need an hour and a half time on Thursday. If council were to approve this today, I would like to keep, unless you hear from me between now and Thursday, I would like to keep Thursday available. Then we can have those discussions.
Can I just follow up by saying
Sure, go ahead.
that it looks like this may be wrapping up. I'm not sure what we have, but I'm getting hungry.
Yeah, there's going to be a few more people that want to speak, Councillor Bartow, so maybe you can grab a cracker or something. I see Councillor LeBlanc next.
I'm good. I got a great explanation from Mr. Dick.
Councillor Hudson.
Yes, I would prefer that we wait until Thursday on this, because if I recall back through the presentation, David was still going to come back to us with some more background information on some of the items. And I guess one of the main ones I might mention would be the office expenses. He was going to give us more detail behind the costs there. I'm not saying that they're wrong, but he was going to give us some more detailed information as to what comprised those expenses.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Councillor Redden?
Thank you. I'm with Councillor Hudson here. I'd like to digest a little more before I go approving this. I do have a question. So we have our West Paradise site, and my assumption is the cost for actually cleaning the site up would be a capital cost. But we also have to hire a consultant to tell us how we have to clean it up. And I'm curious about, is that a capital cost or a operating cost? Because we've got other consultants that are operating costs and not capital costs. So I was just curious for comment.
Mr. Dick?
It could be both. My suspicion is at this point, we have identified some costs in our budget that will be associated with this environmental study. I'm not sure. My anticipation is it's not a very big number, but it could be a capital number. And when we ultimately sell the West Paradise site, those proceeds will go into a reserve, and that reserve will help us pay for some of the capital costs associated with this. So at this point, Councillor Redden, I'm going to say it's going to be capital at this point, but I could live with it either being capital or operating.
Anybody else? Councillor Bartow?
Just going back to waste management, I was just kind of curious because over a year ago, we went into an agreement to proceed for a year with Valley Waste, and we were supposed to discuss that in the meantime, and we haven't. And we're still into the contract, and I noticed in the budget, they actually presented an increased cost to us, which we have not discussed. And I just was curious what all that would mean in the go forward, because are we approving a budget that kind of, for an item that needs more discussion? And is this something, if we do it for now, that we can kind of jump on the bandwagon, decide what we're going to do? Because we really didn't have an opportunity to see what are we going to be dictated to that? I know fuel costs are up, and that's probably a lot of it. But I'd like to get some reasoning and some backup information, why that fairly significant increase.
Mr. Dick, a quick response. I know that it's coming out a bit from left field, but can you?
Well, I was actually going to defer this to you, Mr. Warden, because you're on the IMSA committee. So I guess from my perspective, the reality is we don't have an alternative at this point. We don't have alternative waste management at this point. So one of the things when council agreed to go to this IMSA agreement, which is waste management and the transit service, is what over this next 2-year period, whenever it starts, is we will look at alternatives. And so my understanding is that we have no choice but to remain as a receiver of services as they're presently being provided by Valley Waste. I was expecting, and certainly communication that we had last fall, is that the rate would be the same as it was last year. I was quite surprised last week when we saw, or a couple of weeks ago, when we saw the increase in rates. And I haven't quite let that one go yet. I will be dealing with that. But because we wanted to do the budget, I wanted to put the higher rate in, again, being conservative. I suspect that, as Councillor Bartow said, yes, there are cost increases, fuel being one of them, that we may have to pay this $1.70 or 174 versus the 166. But we haven't quite finished with that discussion yet. But is there anything further, Mr. Warden, that you wanted to speak to in terms of where you are with the IMSA?
Oh, I think everybody knows where we are. We haven't even hired the administration to move the project forward at this point in time. So I have a question, Mr. Dick, and it arises out of my own naivety. And it has to do with the money raised for capital projects. I believe, and I could be wrong, that we don't use taxpayers' money for capital projects, that the capital projects comes from things like gas tax and maybe grants of some sort from other levels of government. For example, if we wanted to start putting money aside to build a new administration building, or if we want to build a new administration building, which is clearly a capital project, are we restricted by the money we might get from gas tax or other sources from government? Or could we decide as a council that this is something we would want and we're prepared to raise some of the money from taxpayers? So I just don't understand the raising of money for capital budgets, does it all have to come from something other than the taxpayers? Can you help me out?
And everything's paid by the taxpayers, whether it's a municipal taxpayer, provincial taxpayers, or federal taxpayers, they're paying for it all. So if the building, let's use that as an example, we decide, council makes a decision that we want to invest funds going forward to build a new building. So council could say today, we want to start putting aside, I'm going to just throw this out there, $100,000 a year for a period of 5 years. Then 5 years comes and we'll have done all the work ahead of time to say, okay, we've got the architects and ready. So we're ready to build the building. We know the building's going to cost us $5 million. So we've allocated 500,000 for that. We would borrow the balance of it because I don't suspect that an administration building would be covered under gas tax. But other than money that we're getting from the federal government by a grant or the provincial government by a grant, whatever those grants are, everything else is either financed from reserves, which are supported by taxpayers, municipal taxpayers, or it's funded by debt that's going to be supported by taxpayers. So even if we borrowed 100% of the money to build that building, these taxpayers and future taxpayers will be paying for it over time, no different than a mortgage. So at that point, so when we talk about internally, we finance all our projects from non-tax sources. That's only if it's grants. But if it's reserves, as I said, reserves have been an accumulation of tax dollars, and debt eventually will be tax dollars.
So we fund the reserves from municipal taxpayers.
Surpluses, yeah, surpluses, yes.
From surpluses.
Right. Or a direct allocation. So we talked about earlier the 55,000 that we're putting aside for recreation and cultural reserves. That's a tax dollar increment that's going in there. At the end of the year, when we have a surplus, that surplus goes into a reserve, and that reserve could be whatever council wants it to be. Typically, those go into, I don't know what we call them here, working capital reserves or tax stabilization reserves or things like that.
I see. Okay, thank you for that. Unless there's something else, what I'd like to do on a procedural basis. Now, you recall that I thought this was a council meeting because I thought that it would have to be council that would approve the budget. But I was told it's a committee of the whole meeting. So I guess we could recommend to council something about the budget. But I've heard other councillors say they'd like to have the 2 days to at least think it over and perhaps raise the issue for Thursday, since it looks like we're going to meet on Thursday in any event. So if we are going to in fact go ahead on Thursday and deal with this, Madam Clerk, should that not be a council meeting on Thursday? Or
It's been called as a special committee of the whole. You would still, if you're going to approve the budget, I think the CAO already touched on it. there's more formal wording that you should have for it, because it would include setting the tax rate and approving the area rates and other, if you can't, approving the budget and you've made a change to what you got today. Oh no, you didn't take it out. But I don't think you need to make a recommendation today. But I think staff should, if that's the way council thinks they're going to go, staff could provide the wording that would be needed, and you could make it a recommendation. It could be a special council. If there's going to be other meetings next week, you could have a special council after you've heard it all, and after you hear the capital. I do know there's a, staff does look for for better wording, a drop dead date in order to get tax bills sent out, but I don't think that's imperative for today.
Thank you. So this is the committee of the whole. We could make a recommendation to council today, I guess, if we wanted to. I'd like to have a show of hands. How many people would like to deal with this today, and how many would like to deal with it as the first item on the agenda on Thursday? So could I, Deputy Warden, do you want to speak to something there?
No, I was just going to, you asked for a show of hands.
Well, okay, well, I had, so those people that would like to deal with this on first thing on Thursday morning, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, wait. Okay, Thursday morning, first thing on the agenda to approve what we've done today, giving people 2 days to think about it. All in favor, just raise your hand. 1.
What's option B?
I see confusion. I see
Yes.
hands going up and down.
Yeah, yes.
The options are, we can pass a motion today at committee of the whole to recommend to council that the budget be approved as presented today.
Or
We don't have to have any motion today. We can deal with it the first thing Thursday morning so that councilors have time to consider anything they want to raise that they didn't raise today, or if there's something that, as Mr. Dick said, that they want to add to the budget, they'd have a couple of days to think it over. So those are the two options, either today or Thursday morning. I see it, as I see it.
option 2.
Councillor LeBlanc, did you want to speak to that?
So yes, we're going to do option 1 or option 2. So now I know what I'm voting on. I'm prepared.
Okay, Councillor Barto, did you have a question on what we're doing?
Yeah, option 2 is a bit of a problem because it shouldn't be first thing on the agenda. Because we need to probably discuss a little bit. If councilors in the next 2 days have second thoughts and want to bring something up, we shouldn't be voting on it before they have a chance to bring anything new to the table.
Oh, that was I'm sorry, I miscommunicated. Yeah, anybody could speak to anything on Thursday morning. And that would be the first item on the agenda would be the budget, and people could speak to it. And then we would have a decision as to what we're going to do. I wasn't going to stop people from talking. Deputy Warden?
Thank you. And that would be a council meeting on Thursday. We'll switch that to a council meeting.
Well,
or another.
no, I think not, because as the clerk said, there has to be a formal council motion with formal wording that fits into the tax rate. And I don't see that being necessarily ready on Thursday morning. Plus, it's been called as a committee of the whole meeting, and the clerk would have to change some notices. I think that if we kind of agree on Thursday where we're going, then we could perhaps have a next special council meeting, because we're going to meet again, I think, shortly, to deal with formalizing with the formal motion that's required, is my sense. Councillor Sheridan?
So just a question for you, Warden, to Mr. Dick. Is there any reason that, in his mind, that this should go forward today? Are we holding them up in any way to going forward with what they need to go forward with?
Mr. Dick?
I think, would we like to have had it done in March? Yes. Would we like to have it done today? Yes. But I don't think by waiting, even if you were to have a council meeting on Thursday, or even if it's a committee of the whole, I don't think, what's the latest date you need, Shelley?
By the end of the first week in May.
Yeah, so we have some time.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barto?
Yes, thank you. I was just curious on the procedures or policies. Carolyn may be able to answer for me, but we already got it advertised as a committee of the whole meeting. Can we change that to a council meeting in only 2 days? Is there anything to do with public notification that would be brought into question there? And if it is a committee of the whole meeting, this is the second point of the question, was we would just be making a vote to recommend to council anyway, and then have the vote at a different time. Am I correct?
Madam Clerk, can you respond to that?
Respond to the second half. Yes, that's correct. You can make a recommendation on Thursday for a recommendation to council, because that's what committee of the whole does. You can call a special session of council to consider that. You can call it, because you call special meetings to deal with one item. You can make a recommendation at committee of the whole, and then you can call a special council to deal with that one item.
Okay.
Is problematic, yes, to change a meeting from a committee of the whole in 72 hours to change it to a council meeting.
Councillor Sheridan?
So in saying that, could we hold a special council meeting right after committee of the whole on Thursday?
You could call that, yes.
So would that be a way of dealing with it in one day?
Yeah, we can call an emergency meeting.
It's not, they're not emergency meetings. They're just special meetings. And that
Okay.
an urgent or timely issue that you could call a special meeting for, because there are deadlines for staff to get that information out.
So we have enough, sorry.
Go ahead,
Nice.
Councillor Sheridan.
So would we have enough time to call that special meeting in your time frame?
The warden can call a special meeting right this very second to happen
Okay,
in minutes. Yes.
perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Barto?
Just going back to what was talked with the CAO earlier was, are we trying to rush this a little bit and unnecessarily, because he said it might be convenient to vote the operating budget and the capital budget at the same time. So maybe if, why call a special meeting on Thursday following this just to rush when it's not going to necessarily help in the long run? And we could go as the CIO mentioned and vote them both in at the same time at a later date. I'm just throwing that out there to bring that back to the surface for discussion.
Well, we can, if we do decide to make a decision on Thursday instead of today, then we can discuss on Thursday whether we want to do it on Thursday or blend it in with the capital budget. We could discuss that then. Councillor Redden?
I was gonna call the question and we're way off topic.
Yes, perfect.
Well, we're just looking for the procedure as to whether you want to do this on Thursday or today. So I'm happy to call for, there's not really a motion. I just want a show of hands on the process, whether you want to proceed with this today or whether you'd like to deal with it on Thursday. So I'll ask hands up that want to deal with this on Thursday. Hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those that would like to deal with it today. Hands up. 1, 2, 3. 7 to 10, we'll deal with this on Thursday. We already have a scheduled meeting for Thursday. We'll deal with this Thursday morning and see where we are and then proceed in camera on personnel matters, it sounds like. So, Councillor Barto, I hope you're not too hungry yet still. We're heading into the lunchtime. Mr. Dick, is that it for today? We can adjourn.
No, I'm waving my arm so you can't see me in the small little square. You and I spoke yesterday about the potential of having council, if they choose, to be in attendance on Thursday. Is that something council would be interested in doing?
Yeah.
My recollection is that when we had the vote last time, it was for the 2 meetings this week, but council is is able to change whether they want to meet. I won't say in person, I'll say some in person and some on Zoom. And this was an interesting experiment that we had today to go through a slideshow, a presentation with the counselors on the side, and Mr. Hopkins was able to work it out that I could see everybody in the end. But if you want to raise it, what happened is it was a 6-5 vote last time. So we decided that it would all be on video conferencing, but if there's a majority that would rather meet in person and a minority just come in on video conferencing, I'm happy to put that on the table. Mr. Dick, would you like me to determine that? I could go
Yeah.
away.
No,
Yeah.
I think I think, anyway, I won't say anything. I have personal views on it, but I'll leave that up to council.
Councilor LeBlanc?
I don't think it's a bad plan, because of all times to be on Zoom is for a budget. No
Sure.
matter how you look at it, it's a very difficult time to go over things for a budget time. In regular time, it's difficult, but I'm sure you didn't have a good time today, and a lot of questions, we're all over the place because it's difficult. Not that we're not doing a great job. I'm just saying that it was not the perfect timing to be on Zoom for budget time. That's just my personal opinion. It would have been easier. So if we're going to have some kind of hybrid of we can go in or you can't, I think we should be discussing it, or at least, or are we given the option, or how are we moving on from here?
Well, I'm happy to raise the question, and I think we're not going to require people to attend in person, because we've already passed a motion that you can attend by video conferencing, and it won't count against you until July. So I'm happy to have a show of hands as to how many people would like to attend in person on Thursday, and how many would like to attend on video conferencing. And then if the majority would rather attend in person, then those that want to attend in video conferencing can do so. So I don't know if we need discussion about it, because nobody's going to tell anybody what to do. It's just what every individual wants to do, and see where we are. So I think unless there's something else, I'll just call for a show of hands. How many people would show up in person on Thursday for the meeting? Hands up.
Probably so, yeah.
One, two, three, four. Just a minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Keep your hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those that would intend to attend by video conferencing, hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4. So I get 6-4.
We're missing Alex.
We're missing Alec, but I don't think it would matter that would make it 6-5.
Yeah.
So then I think what we'll do then on Thursday is those who wish to attend in person will attend in person, and those who wish to attend by video conferencing will attend by video conferencing on the screen. We've done that before, not for perhaps 4 people, but that's the plan. Everybody understand that? Everybody see where we are? Now, under our policy, those 4 people were to give reasonable notice to the clerk that they intend to attend by video conferencing so that she can set it up. So maybe we can do that right now. Those 4 that would intend to attend by video conferencing on Thursday, hands up again so the clerk can get your names down.
Point of order, Warden.
It's all set.
Yeah, Councillor Redden.
The meeting's already been called as a video conferencing meeting.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
The meeting has already been called as a video conferencing meeting, so I don't need to give anybody notice.
There's already a Zoom link provided for everybody.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
I did have one counselor send me their intention it was their wish to attend by video conference.
Okay. Okay, so just so we all understand that 6 of us that want to attend in person will, and the others that want to attend by video conferencing will attend by video conferencing. Does that, everybody understand that? We're good? Okay, thank you. A motion to, Mr. Dick, are we done? Can we move to adjourn?
Looks like Councillor Bartow is fading away up there, so I think maybe we should be done.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillor Hudson moves, seconded by Councillor Longmire. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried.
See you on
See you
Thursday.
Thursday morning, 9:30.